The weird woman who tried to rob or kidnap me? This happened to me a year ago outside a famous department store in Mexico while I was waiting for the bus. That day I went to buy a birthday cake for my best friend, among other things, so I had a lot of things to carry. I usually walk home. It's not that far, but since I had a lot to carry, I decided to wait for the bus. It was around 4 p.m. and since I was in a very central part of the city, there were a lot of people walking around and waiting for the bus, so I found what happened next very strange. I was leaning against the window of the department store while carrying the bags and trying to keep my balance so the cake wouldn't slip, when a woman approached me and started talking to me. I don't know what I look like since people always approach me to talk to me easily, even though I'm quite introverted. So it didn't seem strange to me at the time. However, one of the first things she said to me was a warning, something like, "Be very careful with your things. There are very bad people. Someone can steal from you." I took it as kind words and didn't pay attention. However, the woman began to ask me where I lived, what bus I took, what my parents' names were, what they did for a living, where I went. The questions were probing. It gave me a bad feeling, so I lied to all of them, following my mother's advice regarding strangers. And then she began to tell me nonsensical things about her personal life. She had no verbal coherence. I didn't understand anything she was saying, as if she was telling random stories and connecting them in an absurd way. I noticed there was something very weird about her when I examined her. Her face was delirious. She was looking almost to the sky. Her eyes opened wide when she spoke nonsense to me, and she had a disheveled appearance that I had not noticed before. I sincerely thought she had schizophrenia or something like that. And then she began to get very close to me, invading my personal space and repeating the same warning from the beginning over and over again. I began to get scared and moved away from her. A woman even saw us and seemed surprised. At some points, the woman cornered me and got so close to my face that I felt I was being sexually harassed. I forgot to mention that when I said which bus I would take, she suddenly said she would take that one too, even though she had told me she was going somewhere different. She spontaneously made up that she was going to visit her brother, and that's why she would take that bus with me. I then told her that I think it would be better if I walked because the bus was taking too long, but she wouldn't let me go. And when I insisted on going, she told me that she would accompany me because she was going to the same place. How come she was suddenly going to the same place? I didn't understand. In the end, already quite nervous and scared, I told her that I would walk and said goodbye, pretending to be nice. And I simply walked to leave. But then she started following me from behind for about a block. When I turned onto another street, I had to run without even caring about the cake until I lost her. I had to omit a few observations to keep it short, but I got the impression that if she didn't have any intentions of assaulting me at any opportunity, then maybe she was waiting for us to be alone somewhere so she could do something worse. Sometimes there are kidnapping tactics in Mexico where there are more people involved. Luckily, it was in the afternoon, and there were a lot of people walking around. But I don't know what would have happened if I had gotten on the bus. Would she have followed me? To what extent? To do what? So, to the woman outside the department store, let's not meet again. I almost became another statistic in a Bulgarian park at 4 a.m. This happened to me roughly 1.5 years ago, and I still get anxious thinking back about what happened in the summer of 2023. It was the year I had my first success with my online business, which allowed me to start traveling Europe while working and saving up for my dream of buying farmland. 2023 started amazingly. I lived a few months in Malta, then in Budapest, visiting friends who study abroad. I'm originally from Germany. I'm 32 and turning 33 this year. The first destinations were a wonderful contrast to the miserable cold winters that drag on for months in Germany. After having a tremendous time in Malta and Budapest, it was already the beginning of summer. My final destination that summer was to visit a friend. Let's call him Ben. He's about a year younger than me, and currently studying medicine in Varna, located in the very east of Bulgaria. It's an interesting place with lots of Soviet-style slightly run-down architecture, but it still has its charm as a beach city. The people are very nice, and there are some beautiful spots. There are many expats, and I spend my days enjoying the large parks near the beach itself, and its various cafes and clubs. I met lots of people and frequently went out to the beach clubs with them on the weekends. It was a nice, hot summer, and I was enjoying myself until one particular night. I was out with Ben and many of his university friends again. We partied all night, had drinks, danced for hours, and just enjoyed ourselves during this wonderful summer night. Since we'd been to day events before the party, I started feeling tired and decided to head home. I should describe the layout of the city, as it's quite unique. Varna has a beach along its entire length, and for most parts, there are very big parks stretching for kilometers along the beach before they lead to the city. My rented apartment was slightly northeast of the clubs, roughly a 10 to 15 minute walk, which I'd done many times. People had warned me about occasional attacks, muggings, robberies, always asking me to walk at least part of the way with someone. I usually didn't listen, just walked with my music playing, though I remained wary of my surroundings. That night, a few people who were also tired left with me. They lived a bit more west, so I had to leave them after 5 minutes and continued alone with my music. It must have been around 4 a.m. when I came to a park I usually cross, separate from the main beach parks closer to where I was living. Being the summer and the weekend, there were still a few people walking around and driving even at 4 a.m. When I entered the park, I wasn't shocked to see someone sitting on a bench, maybe 15 meters away from me to the right. He was sitting there, staring at his phone, and I remember the scene vividly. Behind him were some bushes and trees. As the lighting in the park was very sparse, I only noticed at the last moment that someone was approaching him from behind through the bushes. I think because I walked into the park, the guy sitting on the bench must have briefly looked up from his phone and heard someone approaching. It all happened so fast. I saw someone running out of the bushes with both hands raised above their head, holding a large rock, sprinting at the guy still sitting there as he turned his head. Not immediately realizing the danger, I kept walking briefly before stopping. The guy on the bench screamed and ran straight out of the park, vaulting over another row of bushes and disappearing across the street. I pulled my headphones off and stood there watching, not fully comprehending what was happening. You need to understand that this all happened so fast, until the guy who had just tried to attack the other person with a rock turned to face me. A shiver ran down my spine as adrenaline rushed through me, preparing to run. When he lifted the rock again and started manically smiling while running in my direction, I turned and ran for my life. He followed me for roughly 2 minutes. I could still see him behind me even after crossing the street. I ran around the block and was incredibly relieved to find the kebab shop still open. I rushed through the door. The people inside were shocked, and I couldn't speak straight, but I didn't need to say much, as the psychopath came to the store and started bashing the big window with the rock. When the glass broke, he finally ran away. What makes this even more chilling is that I later discovered I probably encountered someone who wasn't new to violence. In the same city, same park, someone had been bludgeoned and killed with multiple stabs in the back just 1 year earlier. I waited a few minutes, put my music back in, and walked home, carefully avoiding the park. Afterward, I was shaking at home, locking every door. I couldn't sleep well, and the next morning I discovered I had a fractured tooth from grinding it in my sleep that night. I'm forever grateful that this turned out okay. I'm also grateful that I met those people who offered to smoke earlier, as the timing might have saved both me and the guy on the bench. If I hadn't entered that park at the exact moment, the man on the bench might not have noticed his attacker in time. While this was the scariest situation of my life, other than nearly drowning in the ocean once, I think I learned that there are some situations you cannot control. Stay safe out there, folks. And maybe, don't walk in the park alone at 4 a.m. in a foreign city. But maybe that's common sense. A quick side note. The author of this post used fictional locations in order to not give away any of their own personal information. Some commenters were a bit confused, so I figured I would add this into the video. Back to the story. I was stalked in 2024 by a minor, and it was hell. To preface this, I am currently 19 going on 20, due to a vindictive teacher. She manipulated the grades so I would have to repeat the 3rd grade, because I called another student a brat for crying about wanting her mom. The context behind is irrelevant. But the rundown is, this girl thought because her mom was a teacher, she could cry her way into her mom's class. Her mom was a high school teacher, and she would always cry until she was allowed to go. Then her mom would be distraught having to leave her class to go pick up her daughter because she wanted attention. I ended up snapping and telling the girl she's in the 3rd grade and is too old to be crying for her mom and disrupting other students leaving. Probably harsh, but you could tell the girl was spoiled. But on to the actual person in question. In August of 2023, I was in my junior year. I went to a trade school in Sumero County for graphic design. A sophomore named James had taken notice that I wasn't dropped off at our home school like he was. He offered to drive me home. I didn't know this kid well. I spoke to him a few times, but other than that, I wasn't buddy-buddy with him. I told him my mom prefers to meet people before just letting me ride in a random person's car, especially a guy. With me being 18 at the time, I told him that if he got into a wreck, I would be responsible as the adult in the car. After that, he didn't really bother me with anything. We still talked, and I could tell he wasn't neurotypical. It wasn't until my senior year that things got creepy. We exchanged the numbers, because sometimes I would help him with his homework he didn't fully understand, and give recommendations of horror channels on YouTube, such as Reddit stories, creepypasta readings, or channels that cover disturbing videos, like Hannah the Horrible, Nick Crowley, Nexpo. Within a month, he found my home address. I never told him where I lived, and he got dropped off way earlier than me. The way the homeschool worked was that all the students on the west side of Fontaine going into Sulani would go to one singular middle school and high school, while students from East Fontaine going into Liu would go to another high school. I never told this kid where I lived, let alone a rough area, so I started documenting everything at this point, no matter how big or small. The next following months, if I would fall asleep on the bus, he would tap my headphones, snap them on my ears, kick my legs, shake me, or call my phone just so that I would talk to him. In April, he asked me to go to prom with him, and I tried to tell him multiple times that I wasn't interested, and he tried to manipulate me, to which I just lied and told him that I had a family event that day. After that, I said something to the principal about him harassing and shaming people to go to prom, and he gave the most insincere apology ever. He worded it like he was forced to apologize. I get a phone call the next day of him asking if my sister drove a red car and worked at a coffee house. I quickly told him no and blocked his number. I went to the administration, coupled with the fact that this kid would call to ask if I went to the Dollar General, went to work, or if I was home. He told me he had thoughts about killing his mom's boyfriend, how he wants to smash his teeth in, smacking his phone against the window, and tried to manipulate me into calling while he was having a panic attack, and ranted about how my math teacher needed to be gutted because she was overweight, and that fat women are ugly and horrible vessels for producing babies. She's not overweight from poor diet. She has a medical condition that causes a buildup of estrogen. The worst was when he lashed out in anger about him losing an AirPod case and aggressively stomping on his AirPods and literally foaming at the mouth. I went to the principal and liaison after this, only to be unable to talk, and they yelled at me for about an hour about how I was being mean to a kid on the spectrum, and that my information, my mother's information, and my sister's information is public information. I started having a panic attack and called my mom. At this point, I was literally vomiting in the trash can of the conference room. My mother was pissed. My mother told me to call the sheriff's office after I get home. The sheriff actually went to this kid's house and told him to knock this shit off, or I had every right to file stalking and harassment charges. The 180 Women's Shelter confirmed that what the principal and liaison did was disgusting and dangerous. So far, I haven't seen him, and I still have his number blocked. Hopefully, I don't see this little bastard anymore. To James, if you see this post by some chance, stay the fuck away from me and my sister. I hope your future general finds out about this shit. Yeah, that's right. This fucker wants to be in the goddamned army. Should I see him again, I won't hesitate to press charges against him. I don't care if it ruins his life forever. He's a danger to those around him and potentially himself. Crazy Lori. So this happened when I was young, maybe early 2000s. I had to have been 5 or 6. I was born in California and had lived there for about 11 years before moving across the country. My mom and dad were separated, so I used to visit my dad every weekend. We lived in a small apartment about a 10-minute walk from a small convenience store/gas station, and literally across the street from a Barnes & Noble that my mom worked at. My dad was lonely but also a bit insufferable, which I realized later, so occasionally there'd be a new woman over. He'd introduce us to each other and I'd go back to watching cartoons. One day, he brought home another woman. Again, introducing us. She said her name was Lori. I never had a second thought about her. She didn't look familiar and the name wasn't familiar either. I just continued to watch cartoons. My dad said he needed to grab cigarettes or something from the convenience store around the corner and he'll be right back. Not wanting to leave me alone, he asked Lori to watch me for a minute. As soon as he left and was out of sight, I think Lori said we should go back to the bookstore or just go for a walk. Again, I can't remember it exactly. I just remember holding her hand and walking across the street to the Barnes & Noble. We went inside and I looked at the people at checkout to see if my mom was there. She wasn't, but I just shrugged it off. We got about halfway through the store when I heard a familiar voice call my name. It was my mom's friend and coworker, Lucy. We would often go to her house and I would play video games with her two sons. I was immediately excited to see her and just yelled her name. She said, "Hey, come here for a minute." And I ran up and gave her a hug. At that point, she started walking me somewhere else. I think she had asked if I wanted a lollipop or something and walked me to the employees only office in the back. I hadn't realized that Lori had left. Lucy had said something into the radio and told me to wait in the office. I now realized that she had called security. Apparently, I was basically kidnapped and just had no idea. I found out later in life that Lori's children were taken away from her because she wasn't fit to take care of them. She also worked at that Barnes & Noble and was fired. So my mom and Lucy knew all about how crazy she was. Lucy had called my mom and told her what happened. She immediately came to pick me up and drove me back to my dad's apartment to chew him out. I can't remember if my mom took me back with her or left me with my dad after that, but I still went to visit him every weekend. I don't know if Lori was found and arrested or what would have happened if Lucy hadn't been working that day, or if she never saw me. I'm just glad she did. So, the crazy Lori who somehow enticed my dad and tried to kidnap me. I doubt we'll ever run into each other again, but even so, let's never meet again. The man with surgical gloves. This story is 100% true, and it's always creeped me out. I think about it a lot. About 3 years ago, I was out for a late night walk in a park that was about 2 blocks from where I lived at the time. It was a pretty safe neighborhood, so I often felt comfortable walking around alone during the late hours. I remember it being around 3:30 in the morning. Don't ask why I was up that late or walking around during that time. Let's just say I was going through some stuff. In hindsight, I know it wasn't smart, especially as a young woman. Anyway, I approached the park, which was lined with large bushes. There was also a street next to the park, and on the other side of the street, a large grassy field. Suddenly, I spotted a bald man carrying large objects wrapped in plastic. He had on blue surgical gloves and a long plastic jacket. He seemed to be transporting these bagged items across the street from the park and into the field. I stopped and watched for a moment, as he began crossing the street again with more bagged items. He stopped when he saw me, and ran towards the bushes. Then he stuffed his bag into the bushes and hid in them. I could see him clearly, and the whole situation gave me bad vibes, so I quickly turned around and started walking back home. I glanced back to make sure he wasn't following me, and I saw his bald head peering over the bushes, staring right at me. I started speed walking, and when I was about a block away, I saw him sprinting across the street to hide behind a large tree. Again, all I could see was his bald head peering around the side of the tree, staring at me. At this point, my heart was racing, but I kept walking quickly. I didn't want to run because I didn't want him to know I could see him following me. My thought process was, if a lion is stalking you, it's not a good idea to run, because they'll start chasing you. I just focused on staying calm and getting home safely. Finally, I reached my house and locked both the front and back doors. I tried to shake off what happened and go to sleep. The next day was completely normal, so I decided to walk to the park in the daylight, where there were lots of people around. I checked the bushes to see if he'd left anything behind. Nothing. Later that night, I sat down to watch a movie. I decided not to go on any more late night walks after that incident, even though nothing happened to me. It was creepy, and I realized it could have turned into a bad situation. You never know what someone is capable of. It definitely seemed like I had caught him doing something suspicious. While I was watching the movie, I got up to grab a glass of water. My kitchen has a window next to the sink with a view of the backyard, and I always kept the kitchen lights off at night so that I could keep an eye on the yard without anyone being able to see me. When I looked out into the backyard, to my surprise, I saw him standing in the middle of my yard, staring at my house. I knew it was him, because even in the dark, I could make out his pale bald head. I immediately cracked open the window and yelled, "Hey!" and he took off running, leaving the gate to my fence wide open. Since then, I never saw the man again. I still have no idea what he was doing that night, or what his intentions were in following me home and stalking my house, but I don't think I want to know. My brother joined the cult and has fallen under a religious psychosis spell. Religious delusion. The term delusion refers to a strong, consuming belief in something that is untrue. Religious delusions involve beliefs concerning religious ideologies or figures. Medical news today. Psychosis. Psychosis refers to a collection of symptoms that affect the mind, where there has been some loss of contact with reality. Forgive me if this post is a bit scrambled. I'm on my third glass of wine and contemplating life right now. My brother Brian and I grew up very close. Movie nights with the family dinners, game nights, holidays, family road trips, very normal. We eventually grew up and now, both in our 20s, moved away from home. I haven't seen him recently, but we text here and there to confirm aliveness. Brian suddenly became extremely religious nearly overnight. I'm talking extremely. Now, I don't judge anyone, but no one in our family is particularly religious, and he does not have religious friends. He found a church in his new city that he is giving his life to. He is completely isolated, and his only friend is the priest. He's secretive about what church it is and spends all of his time there. Brian is there late night every day, supposedly helping clean up, but that just doesn't sound right to me. They took a mission trip to Mexico recently, and I can only imagine what in the world went on there. The only media that he consumes is religious. He has no friends outside of the church. He only goes to church outside of work. And now, before ending each conversation, he will ask, "Are you ready to give your life to God or suffer in hell?" See what I mean? He recently took a trip back home to visit our family, and my mom says the whole thing was wrong. He sat silent much of the time, observing. Otherwise, he looked far removed even when looking right at her. His energy filled the room and made her uncomfortable. He was no longer the bubbly and affectionate guy he had always been. He kept his distance and had nothing to say. When he left, she said she doesn't expect he will come back. Once a month, we catch up by playing video games together. We'll play for hours. This is our bonding time. I entertain his religious conversations regardless of my opinion. Our last game night, he had so much fun he wouldn't let me log off until around 2 a.m. But I've recently found out that he gave his console away to a church member. I was upset. I felt like he didn't think about what that meant. We're not the phone call types, but we love video games and played growing up together. So game nights were perfect. He called me the other night to address the issue. He gave it away because his future wife, a premonition, is coming, and she wouldn't like him playing with other girls, and he doesn't have time for anything except the church. I know this sounds absolutely too insane to be real, but unfortunately it is. He assured me that he will be completely cutting me off because his premonition wife is more important than his relationship with me. He spoke with such clarity that it was terrifying to be so deluded yet so sure of yourself. What type of church influences you to cut off family and friends? He'll be moving overseas to find his premonition wife soon. I was shocked. A premonition? Really? Our dad called him, and when asked, "For you to need to cut her off, you must feel for her in another way than as your sister." Brian avoided the question and did not answer. Yeah, I know. How could it get worse than a premonition wife? I am sick for many reasons. Losing sleep. I fear that my brother is in some sort of cult while under religious psychosis, on top of ruining our relationship with possible feelings towards me. His sister. I am a mess of confusion. What in the hillbilly fuck is going on? How could it get worse? My mother believes it's his attempt at removing the temptation, aka me, from his life. I'm stuck between wanting to understand what the hell type of church this is, and also agreeing, let's not meet. No one knows what to say to me, and I can't blame them. I'm mourning what was once our relationship, but the situation gives me chills, and I don't know where to go from here. All I can think of is this one quote that I read. The more devout they are, the uglier their faith will become, since it is based on a lie. 2 guys tried to break in at 5 a.m. Early Sunday morning and around 5 a.m., I woke up to this violent banging and shaking on my door. I live alone on the second floor of an old apartment building downtown, in a very small town. I've been taking Benadryl to sleep for a few months, and sometimes I sleep weird, so for a moment I thought, did that really just happen? And then I heard whoever it was start doing it again. This time, these super loud bangs like they're charging the door. That's when I realized both my fan and AC unit were off. The power was off. It stopped after the second time, and I heard someone stomp down the stairs. I laid there processing what just happened. It's dead quiet without the fan, and I heard a guy's voice outside saying, "No, we were just walking." I'm still lying here motionless in fear, and try to think of someone to call. A few months ago, my downstairs neighbor got my package by mistake and messaged me on Facebook about it after seeing my name. I've seen her a few times, and I know that she has these 2 absolutely ripped pit bulls, so I messaged her thinking she won't even see it till she wakes up. Nope. She immediately starts calling me. She says she saw the 2 guys come out of the building after trying her door, mine, and the person across the hall from me, and then tried to lie and say it wasn't them. She's already called the police at this point and the intruders are gone, so I go downstairs to meet her, and we find the breaker box door ripped off and all of the switches off, which sucks because there's a camera outside, but our landlord said he's trying to back up the footage to see if it caught them. Our other neighbor wakes up. She had no idea it was happening. Finally, the downstairs neighbor got the power turned back on, and the cops showed up within like 20 minutes to get statements. Apparently, the downstairs girl was awake the whole time and heard them trying her door, and her dogs were doing a little growl thing instead of barking. She gave them their descriptions, but the cops haven't updated any of us yet. Some of my coworkers said it maybe was a TikTok trend where they kicked the door in. Thankfully, my door opens outward and not inward if that's the case. But I feel like cutting the power and trying to open all 3 units seems more like an actual break-in. I've barely slept since it happened, and I'm about to try now. To the 2 guys who tried to break in at 5 a.m., consider yourselves lucky you weren't being crapped out by a pit bull right now, and let's not ever meet again. Abandoned club. So, I live in the city now, but when I was younger, I used to regularly visit my grandma's house with my dad. My cousins were almost always there too, and we used to play together when I was little in that village. Well, more like a smaller town. When me and my cousins went to play at the park, there was always this abandoned club nearby. It used to be popular back in the day, but now, all the windows were broken, the door was made of glass, and almost everything was vandalized, graffiti everywhere. I was always curious about what was inside, but I never had the guts to even ask my cousins to go in there. Even during the day, the club felt so off. I don't even know why. Maybe because it was surrounded by trees. It just had a weird vibe. When I was around 13 or 14, I don't remember exactly. I had a friend who was in the same grade as me, but he moved to another country. He would visit every summer, and every time he came back, he'd call me up. One summer we were really bored, and the idea came up that we should finally go to that abandoned club. He was braver than me, so he said he'd go in first because there's no way I'd have the balls to go first. Around 10 p.m., we arrived there with our bikes. It was pitch dark, and maybe 2 or 3 lampposts spaced far apart. so the lighting was really dim. When we stood in front of the club, it felt eerie. We spent like 20 minutes just trying to gather the courage to go in. Finally, we did. We climbed over the broken glass at the door and squeezed through. Once we were inside, we turned on our phone flashlights. The place was a complete mess. Garbage bags all over the walls, some needles on the ground, which was honestly really scary to see, and the whole interior was just weird. It was a pretty big space with this odd architecture paths that led around in circles for no reason. Me and my friend were scared shitless. We tried to stay as quiet as possible so we wouldn't wake up some junkie or whatever else might have been living in there. Then, while I was staring at the bar counter for like 5 seconds, my friend disappeared. Oh my god. My heart dropped. I did a full 360 with the flashlight and he was gone. I yelled his name and then something jumped on me from behind. It was him, laughing so hard while I was having a heart attack. I was so mad but also super relieved. But while he was laughing, I suddenly heard another laugh, one that wasn't his. I'd actually heard it at first, but didn't fully register it until it clicked. That laugh wasn't supposed to be there. I turned my flashlight towards the sound, and there was this guy, a hobo I think, tall, skinny, with long messy hair. I couldn't even see his face properly. I screamed and bolted out of there with my friend. We jumped on our bikes and pedaled so hard back to my grandma's house. That was seriously one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. Later that night, when we talked about it, we thought, how did we not hear him? We were dead silent. Every step we made was so loud. How the hell did he get that close without a sound? And the fact that he was laughing with us made it so much scarier. He was probably insane or something. The red sweater. Something happened to me years ago, and I think about it quite often. And I admit, it still makes my blood run cold. When I was younger, around 10 years old, I was walking with my best friend the same age as me, but we didn't have any adults with us. It was a small, not too busy road, in a sort of subdivision that formed a loop with a few houses, but mainly forest around. Important note, we had already taken a tour of the neighborhood. This was perhaps the second or third we had done. We were walking quietly, and I hear the sound of an engine, and when I turn, I see a white van behind us, driving slowly. We tell ourselves that they want to pass us, as the road is not very wide, so we move aside and let them pass next to us. The van advances a few meters, and stops. At the moment, my best friend and I didn't notice each other too much, and continued to move forward, knowing that the van is just ahead. Stopped, and I don't know. At the time I had a weird feeling that comes over me, so I grabbed my best friend's arm to make us stop. I don't know how long we stared at the van. It feels like it lasted a while, but it was a long time ago, so maybe it was only a few seconds. Suddenly, we saw the passenger side door open towards the forest. I pulled my best friend's arm so we could go in the other direction, and I don't really know why, but we started running. We ran for a while, and when we stopped, we started talking about what had just happened, and she was scared too. We sat in the park and started to relax a little, then laughed and told ourselves that we had panicked for nothing. After a while, maybe half an hour, we said to ourselves that we were going to go back, but we had to go back along the road where the van had stopped to go back. We weren't really reassured, but we told ourselves that everything was fine, so we turned back. When we arrived on the road, to our great relief, the van was no longer there. So we moved forward, quietly, to where it was, and that's when we noticed something. And my god, just writing it today still gives me chills. On the forest's edge side, we see something red, really maybe a meter from the road at most. We approach, and we discover a little red sweater. It was a knitted wool sweater, very bright red. I already found it small for the time, so I'm sure it was a child's size. It looked like someone had tried to burn it, because it was blackened in places, and there was like a small empty plastic container next to it. I imagine maybe gasoline or something flammable. What is very strange is that I'm sure that this sweater was not there during our first tour, because it was red like that. I think we would have seen it, and there were no dead leaves on it, although the ground was littered with them. We never told our parents about this, but even today, I can't help but think that the people in that van didn't mean well to us. I also can't help but think that it was them who dropped off that red sweater. and tried to burn it. What do you think? Was my childhood eye-based and made me paranoid? Or did I unknowingly escape something very serious? And that red sweater? What was it? Who was it? Why? Every time I think about it, it terrifies me. Speech therapist pretends to be my mother. This is a story I originally posted on a different subreddit, but figured you folks might like it over here. This is a situation I found out about around 8 months ago, but it has stayed in my mind ever since. For context, as a child I had severe speech delay. I was completely mute up until a few weeks before kindergarten. This caused me to have a speech impediment, which I technically still have to this day, but to a lesser extent. I'm lucky enough that the letters I have trouble with match up with the letters often dropped in certain accents. So, to the untrained ear, I sound British or Australian, depending on who you ask. Because of this, I often just confirm their accent assumption because it's easier to lie about being British than to explain the speech impediment thing and face any stigma that goes with it. The only people who know the truth are very close friends and family. On to the story. I, 18F, was dating a girl, 18F. We are no longer seeing each other, but for reasons unrelated to the story. We were at a social event when we met up with one of her friends, 19F. I technically have known this girl since 9th grade as well, but not too well. So we as a group get to talking, randomly, completely unrelated to the current conversation. My friend asks me how my mom is doing. I'm caught off guard because that's not usually something you throw into a conversation without knowing said mom. So I ask back, why? Do you know her? My friend goes on to explain that my mom used to be her EA and had helped her work out her behavioral issues all throughout elementary and middle school. Now, this is weird, because although my mom did work in a school for a brief time, she was a lunchtime supervisor and only ever worked in one elementary, an elementary school I know the friend didn't go to. So I asked my friend if she's sure it was my mom because she wasn't an EA. The friend confirms because my mom used to talk about me all the time, and when the friend was deciding which high school to go to, my mom recommended my high school because that's the school her daughter went to. Now, within my high school, there were a few people with the same name as me. My name is about as basic white bitch as they come. So I ask my friend, are you sure it's me who she was talking about and not one of the other people with my name? She once again confirms it was definitely me because my mom would tell her details about my life and told her about my time going to speech therapy. Now hold up. As I said earlier, I am very secretive about the fact that I have a speech impediment. This friend is clearly someone I have never told. Although I will admit, it's not impossible to guess, and the girl I was dating at the time could have told her. But I have never, and I mean never ever, ever, told anyone about going to speech therapy. That's just never a detail I share when telling my life story. It's clear that someone who knows me, like family, is telling her this stuff. There's no way this friend could have accurately guessed so many details about my life. So just to confirm that somehow my real mother doesn't have a double life, I ask them what my mother looks like. She responds that she's somewhat short with curly brown hair. This is not my mother. My mother is tall and blonde. This, though, is exactly what my first speech therapist looked like. She was hired by the school district, and I saw her for about 2 years before she switched to another school. She also works with a variety of special needs, meaning it's very likely she went on to become this friend's EA. But all this to say, somewhere out there, this speech therapist is for some reason pretending to be my mother, and to some extent stalking me, as she would have had to have done research to find out which high school I went to. Additional bonus story that I remembered while writing the post. When I was a child, but after I had switched speech therapists, I was in the store with my mother where there was a shiny blue guitar. Me being a child and liking shiny blue things, really wanted this guitar. My mom clearly said no as it was expensive and I had shown little interest in playing the guitar besides watching my dad play his bass. I was disappointed but understood. Out of the blue, my speech therapist shows up and buys the guitar for me. My mom told her she didn't have to, but my speech therapist insisted. At the time, this just seemed like a nice thing. She was, albeit, overly generous. But now knowing she's parading around pretending to be my real mom, It definitely paints the situation in a different light. I don't know how to feel about that gift now. There's not much I can do about the situation, as I don't even remember what the speech therapist's name was. So let's just hope we don't meet again. My coworker kept a really weird notebook. I worked briefly as a psych tech a few years ago. That clinic was a nice place to work. Most of the staff were the same age, early in their careers, and friends with each other. I don't think any of us planned to stay there super long. I think we were really just there because we wanted to put it on our resumes. To be honest, I never loved the business model. The best I can describe is that it felt like a subscription service. The place wasn't really helping people create individualized plans for how to treat their issues. It just wanted to sign them up for continued care forever. 2 appointments per month, bundle packages, everyone pretended that was fine. Jenny was one of the nurses there. She was nice and we got along. One day, Jenny and I left work a little early so we could go to Marshall's and buy holiday decorations. I still had a work call to make, but my manager said I could do that later from home. We could make work calls through an app. I didn't have a car back then, so Jenny drove us, and she was going to take me home afterward. We got to the store and picked out little decorations, but the checkout line was so long and was going to take at least half an hour, so I figured that was a good time to make the call I still had to do. I asked Jenny if I could take care of that in her car while she waited in line. She said okay and gave me her keys. I had never made work calls outside of work before, and I completely forgot that I need to write notes. I realized that while I was already on the phone, so that put me in an awkward situation. I said something like, "Hold on, just give me a minute, I need to find a pen." I probably shouldn't have done this. I opened the box between the driver and passenger seat to see if there was anything I could use to write my notes. Jenny had some things I could use in there. She had a little notebook and some pens. I was going to rudely use her notebook without permission and then explain it to her when she'd get back in the car. I thought we'd laugh it off together. Thinking back on this, I would not even think about doing that today. I overstepped my boundaries by opening that box and opening a private notebook. I opened it and started flipping to find the first blank page. As I flipped, I saw that each page had a name, an address, and some notes next to it. The names looked familiar at first, but I didn't think they were patients. That wouldn't have made sense since Jenny had no reason to keep a notebook like that. But the more I flipped through, the clearer it became. Yes, they were all patients from our clinic, every single one. It had their addresses. Also, a description of the house. It said things like blue house or house with basketball hoop. My jaw must have dropped. I still can't think of any reason why someone would have those notes. I put the notebook back, closed the box, put my phone on speaker, and finished my call using the Notes app on my phone. I waited quietly until Jenny came back. I never told anyone about this. I just really can't think of any reason for a nurse to keep that kind of notebook with her. Capitol Hill Casanova. So I recently touched on this via a comment in an r/ask Reddit thread, but as I'd basically buried this memory for close to a decade, simply just re-remembering this experience was all it took for the floodgates to open and for it to all come back, including details I'd failed to include in my Ask Reddit comment. That said, I felt compelled to share here, especially because it felt cathartic to type it all out for the very first time. This may be a milder Let's Not Meet post/experience, but I can assure you that it was absolutely an insanely terrifying experience for me at the time, and even to this day, I'm 100% convinced that the man in this story is a potential predator/stalker, or at the very least, possesses similar qualities/characteristics. So back in 2014, I'd gone on a first date with a guy I'd matched with on Tinder. I lived in DC at the time and worked on Capitol Hill for a US congressman. I was around 28 or 29 at the time. While nice, handsome, and a self-declared Southern gentleman, Tinder guy was extremely pushy leading up to our first date. My job was even more insanely busy than normal during that time, often requiring frequent all-nighters and entailing exactly zero social life to speak of. Looking back now, it's painfully obvious that I absolutely did not have the time/space in my life for dating back then. But after months of my bestie begging me to let her create a Tinder profile, I basically acquiesced/surrendered. For weeks, I'd tried to reschedule a set first date due to work being crazy, but Tinder guy would literally not take no for an answer. He was also extremely manipulative and clearly gifted at it, as he basically guilt tripped me/broke me down to finally agree to a first date with him. Only dinner was mentioned for the date, so I go on the date. While the date went fine on paper and probably looked as such to any fellow patrons/bystanders, Tinder guy nonetheless kinda gave me the ick for some reason. At the time, I couldn't lock down why. He was nice/polite, had a great job, was attractive, but still, something about the way he would continue to gaze/stare at me so intently, without blinking, was so unsettling. It was kinda like he was playing some intense, weird-ass staring contest where he was the only contestant. There were a lot of other icks and red flags during our date, but the first major one was the fact that I was casually held hostage, or at least it felt that way. At the conclusion of our dinner, and after politely thanking him for the meal, and knowing 100% that there will be no second/future dates with this guy, I tried to make my exit home, telling him that I had a busy/early workday ahead of me. Not a lie. Instead, Tinder guy, of course, pressures me into going to a bar next door with him for a nightcap. Looking back now, and thanks to therapy, I've learned a lot about manipulation and how it can be weaponized. Tinder guy was a master at this, and I had no chance. After 2 drinks that I didn't want, I again mentioned that I need to get home, with a little more force this time. Tinder guy acts like he doesn't hear me, gets up, and heads to the bar before returning with beers for both of us. I'm beginning to get annoyed and super pissed, so after a few minutes, I fake an incoming phone call from my boss, essentially channeling my inner Meryl Streep, and proceed to, attempt to, give the best acting performance of my life. And not to pat myself on the back or anything, but it should obviously get all the Oscars because holy shit, it worked. The good news, Tinder guy totally buys my Oscar-worthy acting, finally stops ignoring my polite pleas to go home, and he agrees to let me/his hostage go. However, he insists on sharing an Uber home, even though we live in completely separate neighborhoods nowhere near each other. Not to mention, the very obvious fact that I absolutely did not want this creeper to potentially gain any sort of idea where I lived or come anywhere near I live. Quite frankly, I knew at that point I did not want to spend one more minute nor have anything more to do with this creepy stranger, including being trapped in a confined space like a car with this person, so I tried to refuse, repeatedly, as I was feeling extremely/increasingly more uncomfortable, and, again, obviously not wanting him to see where I live. But he literally wouldn't take no for an answer. So in a major, what the fuck are you doing moment, especially looking back now 10 years later, I silently stomached my anxiety, concerns, and protests, and proceeded to Uber to my neighborhood, though I did get out at a different house/address a few blocks from my place, so he wouldn't have my exact address. As I attempt to disembark from the car as quick as the flash, Tinder guy follows behind me, grabs my shoulder, and spins me around, before then aggressively kissing me. Like I'm talking straight up manhandling my face with his tongue. Apologize for the NSFW description, especially if it results in bringing you any sort of trauma, but if I had to experience it, you do too. As Tinder guy finally lets go of my head/face, I'm trying my best to swallow back vomit and, after 10 minutes of placating him, I finally get him to accept that this nightmare first date is finally over, that I'm going to sleep, seemingly in the complete random stranger's house whom we're currently standing in front of, and he reluctantly agrees to leave. As soon as the Uber leaves with the Tinder guy and is out of sight, I run to my actual home, lock and deadbolt the front door as soon as I get inside, and literally sink there to the floor in disbelief. In the end, once I'd calmed down and felt secure again, I was mostly just relieved to be home safe and sound and that I'd survived the date with a deeply unsettling, creepy, and disconcerting man. I had even joked to my roommates at the time, well, can't wait to never talk to that dude again. But alas, 10 years ago me was a naive fool. Instead, immediately following our date, Tinder guy proceeded to send me a barrage of texts that entire rest of the night, fawning all over me, and mostly asking over and over again, can we FaceTime/video chat? Keep in mind, this was literally 1 hour after I had gotten home from our date. I lied. This whole experience has taught me that I'm actually not a terrible liar, at least under duress, and said I was already in bed/basically asleep, and since I had absolutely zero intention to ever speak to this person again, I naively thought that was the end of it. Tinder guy continued to text me nonstop over the next few days, and I'd either ignore him or send him short/curt responses. While it was a cop-out, I'd planned on messaging him the truth/letting him down gently at the end of the week, aka when I wasn't swimming in work craziness. As I mentioned earlier, I worked on Capitol Hill for a US congressman at the time, and as such, my office was subject to strict security screenings, metal detectors, and security/x-ray scanner at the building entrance, which also extended to incoming mail, packages, and deliveries. So the day after this first date debacle, I get a call on my office line from the off-site Capitol Hill package center, stating that they're currently processing/screening a package for me, and that it should be delivered to my office in 2 days. I think, that's odd. I'm not expecting anything. So who would mail me something? But I shrug it off as it's not the first time I've received unsolicited packages due to the nature of my job, and I basically forget all about it. Until that Friday. Our office receptionist comes to my cubicle with an obnoxiously gaudy/over-the-top bouquet of roses, and an accompanying card. Right away, I immediately know who's responsible. However, the real reason I felt so deeply unsettled was the sheer fact that I'd never told the Tinder guy who I worked for, or hell, even which state/delegation my boss belonged to. I'd given him literally zero clues as to whom the member I worked for, purposely I might add. And, while my social media settings were pretty tight/private anyway, I didn't include the name of the member office in which I worked in any of my online profiles, including LinkedIn. I also didn't give Tinder guy my last name, so I have no idea how he would have found it to begin with. There were/are 535 total congressional offices on Capitol Hill. That said, there's approximately 15,000 congressional staffers who work on the Hill, and there's no telling how many staffers who share my first name you'd have to go through in searching for my last name and office address. I shared exactly zero identifying details about the member office in which I worked, and to this day, I have no idea how Tinder guy found out this identifying info when I'd only provided him with just my first name and general employer info. Needless to say, if I wasn't creeped out enough by this guy before, or at that point, now I was 1,000% full-fledged freaked out, especially reading the notes that accompanied the flowers. Lowlights. He talked about how great of a kisser I was, vomit, what he wanted to do to me, bowel rising, how he hoped I could meet his family, add delusional to the list of descriptions for this guy, and how he couldn't wait to see me again. In your dreams, bud. / I look forward to seeing you never. One good thing that came out of this experience is that it finally and obviously gave me the balls to end things with Tinder guy via text. Dating is the fucking worst. And until this experience, if I was talking to someone but I also knew at the same time that I wasn't interested, I would still engage / respond to messages and basically lead them on, all because I didn't want to hurt their feelings and felt guilty. I now realize how unfair that is / was to the other person, and have since vowed I'll never cop out when it comes to uncomfortable issues / topics / messages that the recipient needs and deserves to hear. It also helped instill in me that whole fuck politeness mantra. I'm fortunately in a serious long-term relationship now, but while dating or even in my regular life, if I ever feel uncomfortable and uneasy like Tinder guy made me feel, I now fight the urge to be agreeable and polite, and either directly block / cut ties, or at least explain why I'm blocking before cutting off communication. Anyways, apologies for the length. I've never shared this with anyone outside of my roommates at the time, so it was cathartic to type it out. Stay safe out there. A teacher from another school stalked me. I was a shy kid in elementary school. I don't think I spoke to anyone unless spoken to. And even then, I was often so anxious about being perceived that I kept my replies short and spent the next few hours replaying the conversation in my head, hoping it didn't come off as weird. I had a lot of trouble with boys too, so it was no wonder I spent a lot of time in the guidance counselor's office. My guidance counselor was a sweet younger woman. She and my mom got along well, and I even kept in contact with her through Facebook as I got older. She was truly awesome. By the time I got into high school, I had broken out of my shell a bit. I became a varsity competitive cheerleader. I was in all AP/honor classes, and was the top-ranked art student and president of the art club. And I dated a complete asshole. I truly got the complete high school experience. Now at my high school, there was an option to take tech classes at an applied learning center. They offered a ton of courses, like cosmetology, CNA, automotive, etc. And it was truly a great tool for those not planning on going to college or who just wanted some technical skills before graduating high school. I wasn't able to take any courses at the tech school, but my boyfriend did. He took some sort of police course, and it happened to be taught by my elementary school guidance counselor's husband. Now, this was a very large man. I mean, the most ripped man I've ever seen. His arms were the size of my head, and it's not an exaggeration. Apparently, he was an arm wrestling champion at one time, and I wish I was joking, but I'm not. Over the few semesters my boyfriend had in his class, the two became pretty close. I guess he became some sort of mentor to him, and since I knew his wife, we ended up having dinner at his house. Looking back now, I have no idea why two teachers thought it was a good idea to invite two high school students to their house, but they did. They had two young daughters, probably around 5 and 7. They were also in competitive cheer, so I spent most of the evening talking to them. Dinner was uneventful, and I never thought twice about it, as odd as it was. Afterwards, my boyfriend's teacher followed me on Instagram, and he would like/comment on my pictures, and occasionally message me. It was never about anything weird, and since he was my boyfriend's mentor and past guidance counselor's husband, I literally never thought twice about it. I remember him messaging me once to ask if I could come over sometime to give his daughters tumbling lessons, and I literally thought, wow, what a great idea. I was stupid. Now, fast forward a year or so, I finally realized that my boyfriend was a jerk and dumped him. I would see his teacher at my cheer competitions and he would still occasionally message me, but I didn't think that was weird, since his daughters were into it too. I was sitting in AP Stat one day, goofing off in the back row with a friend of mine when I heard my name called over the intercom. They wanted me to report to the principal's office. Almost simultaneously, my stepdad started texting me, asking me weird questions about pictures that I did not understand. All of my anxiety came rushing back at once. I had never been to the principal's office before, and as I stood up to leave class, everyone stared at me. I walked into the office and was surprised to see my mom standing there, crying, a detective standing next to her, and a big yellow folder sitting on a desk in front of them. The folder was full of pictures of me, and they were found on my ex-boyfriend's teacher's phone. The folder was incredibly thick. He had been stalking me, and I had no idea. I never opened the folder because I didn't want to know. After I left the office that day, I never heard another word about it, except that he was fired. It almost feels like a fever dream, but it happened. I'm just glad I never went to his house to give his daughters tumbling lessons. So, to my ex-boyfriend's teacher and guidance counselor's husband, let's not ever meet again. We camped next to a tent that never stopped laughing. This happened back in 2015 or 2016 when my boyfriend and I went camping in Mendocino, California. A few sites over was this tiny green one-person tent, the kind that barely fits a body. What struck me right away was how empty the site looked. No cooler, no chair, no lantern, no shoes outside, just the little tent, zipped up tight. So we went to bed. But sometime after 10 p.m., it started. Laughter. Not a group around the fire, not drunk campers, and definitely not an animal. I know what barred owls and coyotes sound like. This was human laughter. At first I thought it was maybe a radio or Bluetooth speaker, but it never stopped. Not once. All night long until sunrise. Same tone, same rhythm, and no pauses for breath. Too steady, too repetitive to be a person in psychosis or on drugs. It sounded mechanical, like a loop. That's what makes it worse, because if it wasn't someone actually laughing, then it was someone who had recorded laughter beforehand and brought it out into the woods to sit in that tiny tent in the dark and listen to it for hours. When we woke up at around 6:30 to 7 a.m., the laughter was still going. We packed up fast and left without ever seeing who or what was inside. And even now, years later, I can't shake the thought that someone actually decided this is how they wanted to spend the night. A tent, a recording of endless laughter, and the silence of the woods around them. I should have followed my gut. November 5th, 2022. I'm guessing I'm never going to forget that date, or even disassociate it from this event. I had just finished my courses of the year and summer was right around the corner, so it meant that it was time to catch up with some of my friends. In this particular occasion, it was Nathan. His real name has been changed for the sake of anonymity. Nathan was my best friend at the time, and we would sometimes spend months without seeing each other. But when we did hang out, we would always do the same. Go get some snacks and catch up over coffee before sunset, then walk around town until it's around 9 p.m., and we call it a day, the usual. This time though, nothing felt usual. From the moment I saw him, something in my stomach just dropped. It wasn't him per se. We were on good terms, but something about hanging out that day felt off. Right as I greeted him with a handshake and we went to our usual spot for coffee. We got there and things went by the books, so I shook it off as me being nervous because I hadn't seen him in a long time. That was, of course, until Nathan mentioned that he felt like things around us were weird. Another drop in my stomach. I kept my cool, trying not to sound paranoid or something, but I guess I couldn't help it. "You feel it too?" I asked. He nodded. He said he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong, but it was like our surroundings were odd, like hostile, even when there was nothing to fear. Was it some sort of shared paranoia? Was the end of the year getting to us? We didn't know, but we were sure that it was the first time we felt something like that. We finished our coffee, and I felt like maybe having a walk wasn't going to be the best idea. Maybe we should just call it a day now, and go back to our homes while there's still light. At that moment, my dad called me and asked if I could find out the price of a phone he was thinking about buying. So, while we were going to the store, in my mind I kept thinking, yeah, I'll ask about this and then we split. But no, for some reason, and even after what we had felt, we still decided to do our long walk until dark. That was my last chance to turn back, before it all went down. We used to walk around this boulevard that wasn't really a dangerous area. During a normal weekend, it used to be filled with teenagers and young adults sitting on the grass division in the middle, drinking or smoking, listening to music too. It was a Saturday, 8:30 p.m., but it was completely empty. I like to think that that was my last warning. As we passed the corner, I noticed two other guys who were coming from it as we crossed the street and kept walking straight. I looked over my shoulder, and I noticed that they were behind us. They were probably around our age, maybe older. Now, something like that doesn't normally trigger my red flags, but these two did it with so little. What set me off first is that they weren't talking like us. They were dead silent. Secondly, their pace was off. They weren't trying to pass us, but they didn't stay way behind either. They were keeping distance, and we were completely alone on that street, the four of us. As we approached the end of the boulevard, which goes down into a big park, I warned Nathan, "Hey, these two behind us, they might be onto something." Nathan looks over his shoulder and then back at me. "Want to cross the street, just to be sure?" I nodded, so we did. We crossed the grass area in the middle and onto the other side and kept walking forward down the street. And that was when I saw it, when my heart, gut, and every organ in my body knew before my brain could process. The guys on the other side upped their pace. One of them grabbed something from a fanny bag he had on his chest and went ahead with his friend, partner, whatever. Before I could react, this guy crossed the street, got in front of us and said, "Boys, keep quiet or we'll shoot you both dead," as his partner got close to us as well. My vision went blurry. I couldn't see their faces anymore. All I could see is that they were in front of us, threatening to end our lives and seemingly armed. I froze. My entire life literally flashed before me. My parents, my girlfriend, the dog we had just rescued, and that I was happy to see every time when I got home. What was the last thing I had said to any of them crossed my mind, knowing that I would probably never see them again. In a panic, I gave one of them my phone and raised my hands. But Nathan managed to snap and ran away, while I stayed frozen there, with those shitheads threatening us and telling him to come back. It wasn't until he yelled, "Run!" that I snapped too, and I ran towards him. I tripped not far from where I started. "Shoot him! Shoot him!" I heard behind me, and I thought, this is it. This is how I go. I gathered my strength and got up. I kept running expecting to hear a gunshot behind him, but it never rang. We ran all the way back. I was finally able to talk again, but all I could muster was, "Help us! Please help!" at the top of my lungs. We ran a few blocks until we stopped from exhaustion. Nathan had lost his glasses back at the boulevard and wanted to go back because he couldn't see without them, and getting a new pair is very expensive here. I refused. I told him we should stay there and wait for help or the police, but eventually he convinced me and we went back, carefully to the place where our lives changed forever. Luckily enough, he found them, and those two assholes were long gone. I'm not claiming that anything supernatural happened here, but I feel like everything that had happened before that horrific moment was some sort of warning sign trying to stop us from going there. Hell, when the dust settled, people started showing up in the boulevard, the same kind of strange people I described earlier. We came across a woman who was waiting for her husband to get out of work. Upon hearing what happened, she offered us a ride to my house and we accepted. When we got there, I hugged my mom like I had never done so in my life, and I was thankful for being able to do it. Needless to say, that this day changed me forever. I know that it could have happened on any date, at any hour, and anywhere. But November 5th will never be a normal day for me again. Nathan and I drifted apart. Not because of this, but our friendship was never really the same afterwards, especially with me refusing to go around those areas at night, specifically if we were walking. I will never, ever ignore that feeling again. Not that I want to ever re-experience it. And if your gut tells you that something is off, trust me, it is off. So thank you for the space and the opportunity to talk about this. And if you happen to get here, thanks for taking time off your day to read my experience. Have a good day, night, or evening. I followed a stranger to his home and almost got myself in trouble. This happened 5 years ago, around January 15th, 2020, right before the pandemic. I'm a guy. I was 19 when it happened, and I was in my second year in college in Paris, studying arts. With a couple of girls in my class, we decided to go to a Da Vinci exhibition at the Louvre. It was an exhibition that is on display only once every few decades. It was advised by one of our professors. Anyway, that day we left school at 5 p.m., and we went to a bar nearby before going to the exhibition. I had a few drinks and quickly got tipsy. I was very skinny back then, and I hadn't had anything to eat. Then we took the metro and made it to the Louvre. We had time to see the whole thing and do some sketches of our favorite artworks. Then, at 8 p.m., we left the exhibition to go home. We all went our own ways. I got on the train that would drop me off to my city, and when I sat down, I realized that my phone battery was at 18%, and that I had my battery bank but not the charger. I was annoyed because my phone was the only way I could wake up in the morning since I no longer had an alarm clock at the time. I remembered that I had used my phone in class earlier that day for some drawing models, and that I had plugged my phone to charge it a bit. So I sent a message in the class group chat and asked if anyone saw my charger in the classroom. Some of my classmates would stay in the school for a few hours after our classes to study or keep working on their projects before leaving for the day. And one of them replied with a picture of my charger on a table in the classroom and a text saying, "I took it with me and will give it back to you tomorrow morning." I thanked them and thought to myself, okay, now how do I make sure that I will wake up on time tomorrow morning? Of course, it was the only one I had since all the other ones were no longer working, and I was the only one at home to have this brand, so I couldn't even have used my mom's or my brother's. I asked the dude who was sitting next to me if he had a charger that I could use if he's not getting off the train anytime soon, so that I could charge my phone for as long as possible, until one of us gets off. He replied, "No, I don't, but check at the next station if the store is open so that you can buy one." When we reached the next station, we could see that the store was already closed. Then the guy turned to me and said, "It's closed, but I have one at home that you can use. I live right next to the station." I was still a bit dizzy from the alcohol that I had had a few hours earlier, and I was getting tired, so my reflexes weren't really on point at that specific time. So I answered, "Okay," instead of simply asking someone else. In my head, it was like I was going to his house, bringing the charger, letting my phone charge for a bit with the battery bank, then giving it back to him and going home. But even this scenario wouldn't have made much sense. The guy is supposed to get off 3 stations before mine. When we reached his station, we both got off. It was January, so it was already completely dark outside at this time. The guy goes, "Follow me." At this moment, I had this horrible feeling saying, Don't follow him. Go back on that train and go home." And I quickly got some kind of anxiety attack and simply let myself go. So I went and followed him. I knew deep down what I was doing was completely stupid and senseless, but it felt like I wasn't myself. I was totally stressed out and anxious, and went with him. We exited the train station and walked to the streetcar station right next to it, and got on the streetcar. The fear was rising as we were getting there, and it kept getting worse and worse. I was like, what the hell am I doing here? Just leave. Something is not right. Just leave and go home. But I couldn't. I was like petrified. At this point, it was like I couldn't even control myself. I think that the guy was talking to me the whole time, and I was just nodding to what he was saying. I wasn't even paying attention to what he was saying. From what I can remember, this man was pretty much taller and way stronger than me. We got off the streetcar at the closest stop, walked up the adjacent street, and made it to the front gate. He opened the gate with his key fob, and I stayed in the street, in front of the gate as he crossed it. Then he turned to me and said, "What are you doing? Come with me." In my head, I was like, no, but then I crossed the gate and followed him. This was the entrance of the apartment complex that he lived in. After the gate, there was a long trail leading up to a very large patio with multiple other trails leading to 3 different buildings within the complex. It was nighttime, so I couldn't see much even though there were a few light poles in the patio. We walked up to his building, which was at the very end of the patio, the furthest one from the exit of the complex. Then, again in my head, I was seeing him throwing the charger through the window to me so I could use it. This sounds silly and makes no sense at all, but then again I followed him. I kept following him into the building. We went up the stairs to the 2nd floor and went inside his apartment. Once inside, he said, "You may sit down, I'll be right there." As he turned the TV on, gave me a phone charger that was in the night table drawer, and went to the bathroom. I sat down and thought to myself, well, now you're in deep shit. I plugged my phone in. My phone battery was now at 9%, and my phone was not charging correctly. I noticed after a few seconds that the charger was ripped, and I had to tilt my phone and the charger in a specific way for it to charge correctly. Then I looked around me, and saw that the apartment was very small and messy. It was basically just a bedroom with a small hallway between the entrance and the main space with a door to the bathroom in the hallway. There was a corner of the room that was being used as a kitchen. The bed was the only thing that I could sit on. It was unmade, and there was a lot of unfolded clothes and clutter on the furniture and on the floor. After a minute or so, he came out of the bathroom and sat right next to me on the bed. I still had my jacket and shoes on and my backpack on my back. I played it cool, but was terrified inside. He asked me if I wanted anything to drink or eat, and I declined and said that I would be leaving soon anyways because I need to wake up early in the morning. Then he replied, "You can stay overnight if you want." But I responded, No thank you. I was sitting on the part of the bed that was closer to the nightstand, and he was between me and the hallway leading to the entrance door. At this point, he was just watching TV, and I was looking straight in front of me, just staring at that wall, not moving an inch, just petrified. And just like that, out of nowhere, he put his hand on my right thigh. I typically hate physical contact, even with my own family and friends. It was too much for me to handle, so I called my mother. She already knew that I was not going to go home right after school because of the exhibition. I was trying to buy some time while I was trying to figure something out just to go without him potentially trying to prevent me from leaving. So I was talking with my mother, just telling her how my day was and my time at the Louvre. And I told her that I was on my way home. I managed to keep my composure so she couldn't tell that something was wrong. The last thing I wanted was to worry her, panicking and that the guy would act up even more. After a few minutes, my mom cut me off and told me that she was getting sleepy and that she was going to bed. So she said goodnight and she hung up. I was thinking, oh shit. I looked to my right at the guy. He still had his hand on my thigh, and that guy was just straight up masturbating while staring at me. I locked eyes with him for 2 seconds, and suddenly, my heart started racing. I was terrified. I almost cried, and I could hardly breathe. I called my dad, and thankfully, he picked up the phone. My parents aren't together anymore, and I was living with my mom, so my father didn't know about my visit to the Louvre. I did just like I did with my mother, and told my dad about how my day was and what I saw at the exhibition. I kept finishing most of my sentences with dad so that the guy knew who I was talking with, and potentially preventing him from doing anything crazier. Obviously, because of the fear, I was unable to talk without breathing heavily. At some point, my dad asked me why I was breathing like that, and I said that I was walking fast to catch my train. I then told my dad, "Okay, Dad, now I'm going to have to run so I don't miss the train. Next one won't be here before a while." That was obviously a lie. "Please don't hang up. Stay on the phone." And he said, "Okay." I quickly got up without unplugging the charger. It unplugged when I got up, and I started walking towards the exit. I said, "Gotta go," to the guy, pressed the doorknob to open the door, but it was locked. I didn't even notice it when I walked in. I panicked even more, but the guy got up, walked up to me, unlocked the door, and opened it. Then he said, "Come back anytime," and licked my neck. He had his left arm on the crack, so I had to bend to walk beneath it and out of the apartment. Then he spanked me as I was walking out. Once I was outside of the apartment, I started running, ran down the stairs and even skipped a few steps, ran out the building, ran across the patio, all the way to the gate. I was finally out of the complex, but I still ran all the way to the streetcar stop. I was just hoping that the guy wasn't following me, or that no one that he might know, or that he might have told about me was looking for me, or coming after me. Thankfully, the streetcar arrived right when I reached the stop. The streetcar left and my father was still on the phone. I said to him, "Okay, I'm on the train now. I'll let you know when I get home." He told me to be careful on the way and that he'll be waiting on my message. Then he hung up. From that moment, I felt relieved, but I couldn't help but thinking, what if I did not have the idea of calling my parents? And what if he went crazier and actually tried to do anything more? Or what if he just never let me out of his home, or that someone else was in there with him? Literally anything could have happened to me. After all, I was in his apartment, in his universe. He could have done anything to me. Now I only go by trusting my gut, and that if I sense anything fishy, I will most definitely listen to my body, pay attention to the signs, and of course, never talk to strangers in public transit. It was almost 9:30 p.m. by the time I was on the train that dropped me off in my city. I made it home by 10:30 p.m., but everyone was asleep. I let my dad know that I made it home. My phone battery was still very low. I then went to bed, but I couldn't fall asleep for hours. I woke up the next morning, went to school, and my classmate brought me my phone charger. Then I went on with my day. I only told one of my closest friends about it a year later. When I think about it now, it kind of makes me laugh because of how stupid it sounds, but it truly was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. Follow the blood trail. Me and my friend, both 20 at the time, were students in a university in Midwest Wales. Nothing much ever happened there, besides typical uni student activities. going out drinking, taking drugs, and smoking weed. And man, we smoked a lot. One evening, I was invited to go out to an event of his, some sort of ceremony for one of his social clubs at a local cocktail bar. The drinks were flowing and we were having a nice time, and after a couple of hours, we noticed someone we knew. It was one of our old weed dealers we hadn't seen in around a year or so. He noticed us too, and decided that he would come join us for a drink. For this tale, we'll call him Harry. As we're all catching up, we asked Harry how he was doing. "Oh, I'm okay, but one of my friends got stabbed earlier." We were shocked, but Harry was originally from London, so we weren't as surprised as we could have been. An hour or so later, we decided it's enough of the drinks and it was time for us to unwind with a joint. "Oh, you guys can come smoke back at my place if you'd like," said Harry. So me and my friend, who we'll call Bill, decided to go. Harry also picked up 2 other people from the bar, a couple, but I didn't know either of them. As we walked to Harry's place, we stopped off by the corner of the local spar store, where we noticed a wet puddle on the floor. Harry said, "So my friend I told you about? That's his." And we realized that this was a puddle of blood. A fucking puddle of it. Realizing the sort of company I was with now, a drug dealer that comes from London, I wasn't feeling super great about going to his house anymore. Everything felt off about this, but I didn't want to seem intimidated by it. He was my friend. At least, we acted like friends. But in all honesty, I don't know this guy. Maybe I just wanted to look cool in front of him. I'm not sure. But all I know is that I didn't want to go there anymore. It already felt too late to do anything. We continued down the street to his house, which is in the same direction that the blood came from. It trailed down the street. I was almost half expecting to find a body at the end of this trail. There was that much of it. We get outside of his house, and he stops and turns to us. We look down, and lo and behold, another puddle of blood. He opens the front door and lets us in, locking the door behind us. So my friend that got stabbed, he got stabbed on my doorstep here. And even though I saw the evidence and had a million thoughts running through my head, I just couldn't seem to believe it. Apparently, he got into a dispute with another one of Harry's friends whilst in the house. Something about someone's girlfriend, and he stabbed him right there. And then on the doorstep in the street. This was a Saturday night as well, so it wasn't like it was a quiet day. All of us are feeling pretty nervy now. And although he said it was his friend, how were any of us supposed to know what really happened? We all sat down on the couches, surrounded by hundreds of takeaway boxes which were filled with rocks. On closer inspection, the boxes were filled with MDMA, and each box had a lot of it in it. Now, I've been around drugs before. However, this much was enough to scare me, even without the bloodbath on the doorstep. The guy that was in the couple tried to take a photo of the stash before Harry ran over and punched his phone out of his hand, threatening him not to do that. I needed to smoke a joint now more than ever, although I think that it would probably have made me paranoid. Despite my worry of paranoia, we rolled a joint and asked if we could sit on the bathroom floor and smoke them. This night just gets weirder and weirder. We smoked our joint without anything to worry about and sat back on the couch. As we did, a boy walked through the door. He was probably around 18, but had one of those faces that looked around 13. He was in a full tracksuit, and his eyes were as wide as I'd ever seen eyes open. He was high. I couldn't tell you what on, but he was just high. He took it upon himself to enter the room and walk between us, freestyle rapping and sporadically doing keys around us. Harry was loving it. He was cheering him on whilst the rest of us just sat silently and watched him, waiting for something to go awry. Could this have been the stabber from before? We hadn't seen anyone else in the house, and someone of this guy's caliber almost looked like it would be something he was around all the time, especially if he was from London as well. However, the big spoon left, and Harry asked if we would like to smoke another one. "We better get going. I'm tired and that last joint has put me on my ass," I said, looking for a reason to get out. Surprisingly, Harry was very reasonable with this, and unlocked the door for us. Me and Bill headed out the door, and we stomped home as quick as we could, following the trail of blood back up the street. My stalker was convinced he was Gatsby, and I was his Daisy. I had one of the most terrifying stalking experiences 12 years ago. I was 18 years old, and the Great Gatsby movie with Leonardo DiCaprio had been released. Being really young, inexperienced, and very naive about how to remain safe with unwanted attention. I made every mistake in the book with a guy, who was 23 at the time, and started stalking me. I had just graduated high school and took a job at a health food store in my downtown area. It was my first customer service job. The owner was a big hippie, easy to work with, and flexible with hours. At first I worked different shifts, eventually taking the afternoon to close hours. Due to how small the store was, I was alone without other coworkers. Only our owner sporadically dropping by to grab an item off the shelf for her personal use, then leave after 30 or so minutes. As a side note, our store was situated next to the building that had subsidized housing for those recently released from incarceration or low income. The evening/nighttime hours were risky for young women to be out without a male escort, and every restaurant in the downtown had staff that escorted girls to their car, as it was common to be followed with assaults happening after dark. I was on edge during close, but felt some reassurance as I had parking immediately outside our back exit, a few feet from the door. But I was in the store closing out the register, cleaning, and locking up every night alone. The front of the store was where the cash register was set up, but your back was to the large window that was right next to the sidewalk. The register faced the inside of the store. It wasn't uncommon for me to feel people watching me and catch creepy guys looking at me through the window right behind where I was standing. Again, young and inexperienced, I didn't voice my fears or report the randos that would be a foot away watching me, only separated by that glass window. I picked up a shift during the summer farmers market in the morning. It was a great day. I was so happy to work in the morning and have a higher flow of customers. One guy, I'll call him Cam, came into the store with a brochure for a local event at a spiritual center in the downtown area. I was cordial, smiling, and got permission for us to post it at our register. He was obviously high, nothing crazy, and looked chill. You could tell he was in his own reality. Only talked to him for a few minutes. I didn't think much of the encounter and moved on with my day. Next shift, Cam comes into the store. He strikes up a conversation and was trying to keep my attention. Again, working in the afternoon when we maybe had 2 or 3 people come in before close. He just hung out right at the register. I was trying to give hints that I needed to focus on work, but he would just follow me around the store while commenting on how gorgeous my legs were, and that he thought I had been an angel the last time he saw me. He kept telling me he had had a spiritual awakening because I had shown him interest with how nice I was, insisting I was flirting, and that the sun behind my head made my hair glow like a halo. I was equally creeped out, but also a little flattered because I'd never had that kind of attention. I thanked him for the compliments, didn't call out that they were inappropriate, and just made the same excuse that I needed to focus and walked away. Per usual, he just shadowed me everywhere I went, watching me but not really talking anymore. I was getting really freaked out, and I let him know he was loitering and needed to leave unless he was there to shop. Given how pricey the items were, I figured it would deter him, but he ended up using his food stamps to buy 1 soda or a piece of candy every hour. Maybe $3 spent each hour. He'd make every excuse he was a customer. I went to the bathroom to at least get some privacy. My boss had seen him hanging out in the store before but never commented. I called her and told her I was getting scared by this guy. Let her know that he was making an excuse to stay by buying 1 cheap item and insisting he was a customer through the whole of my shift. I really thought she'd give me support and come to the store. She was a self-proclaimed feminist that espoused consent and boundaries, so I got major whiplash when she defended his presence. She told me that the store was in the red and on the brink of needing to close, because he was spending any money. I shouldn't try to push him out of the store. I tried arguing that he wasn't generating significant income, but she just doubled down that money was money, and then insisted I was overthinking it, and Cam was just a kind soul that had found a similar soul bond with me that created positive energy in the store. Just, what the fuck? So roadblock there. All I could do was carry on. The idea of quitting didn't even cross my mind. Being my first job, I was worried it would look bad if I left after only a couple of months. It was really hard to find local positions that were flexible with school hours, and I would be starting my first semester at the local college soon. Things slowly escalated. Cam started bringing me flowers every day. He'd leave long notes confessing his love and insist we were soulmates. Then he'd randomly play the Great Gatsby soundtrack. He would go on and on telling me that he was Gatsby and I was his Daisy. We were destined to be together, and that my denial of our bond was just like Gatsby's attempts to get Daisy. We were living out the movie, but our ending would be the coming together of souls wrapped in passion. He had this crazed look in his eye every time he brought it up. Then he started just calling me Daisy anytime another customer would come in. He would get angry and jealous that I quickly ignored him and walked away. He started calling himself my bodyguard and told me that it was his duty to beat anyone up that looked at me wrong or made a pass at me that would be a threat to our love. Again, I wanted to emphasize, I was so stupid for not quitting this job or telling anyone about this. It's an understatement that I was a complete dumbfuck for not making police reports, documenting things, creating boundaries, leaving my job, or telling friends, family, and coworkers. For a few weeks, he didn't show up. I thought there would finally be a break or that he lost interest. But then, he showed back up and told me that he was hospitalized. Great, the same routine started all over again. One day, I get a text from an unknown number. It was Cam. Not only did he get my number from a coworker, who he lied to saying he had a new phone and lost my number, but he did a reverse search and found my address. He didn't have transportation, and I was on the other side of town. We didn't have a train system, and it was way too far to walk. As far as I know, he never came to my house. But I'm sure he did, I just wasn't aware. I didn't block his number. Again, I was so dumb, but honestly, I was scared too because he knew where I lived and was so entrenched in this idea that we were bound to each other. I thought things would escalate more. I either ignored his texts or made them excuses for not responding. Would be curt, but he wouldn't take the hint. When I started my semester at school, it got worse again. He formed a group of friends and told me he'd introduce me to them. First, he wanted me to go to his apartment, but when I insisted I wouldn't, he brought them to the store. I stupidly thought they were nice people, but they sided with him saying that he was a really nice guy and I should give him a chance. Told me he was just melodramatic and liked playing out fantasies, but he wasn't a bad guy. A few days later, Cam told me he was worried about my safety with the darker evenings. He said he'd have his friends posted outside the front and the back of the store to make sure I was safe. And they did. It was freaky as fuck. Growing up in a household of abuse, I again didn't register the danger of this situation. I was accustomed to bad things happening to me and was still stuck in compliance/submissive response mode. This behavioral pattern didn't make me fight the setup. They started bringing more delivery gifts to me from Cam, and the 5 of them now loitered in the store with Cam during my shifts, each of them buying one thing each hour to remain customers. It was getting too scary. 6 guys in this store, me alone, young, female, exits being blocked by them as they insisted they were my bodyguards who would watch the doors. My nightly habit became kicking them out, locking the store, and finishing my work in the dark so they couldn't see inside, and then stay in the building for 2 hours so they'd go away. It worked for a week. Then one night I stepped outside the door and all of them were either leaned against the wall by the exit door or leaning on my car smoking and drinking. Cam came and tried to hug me with his buddies whooping in the background. He stank of alcohol and weed. I honestly thought they were going to grab me and force me to the apartment. So I made my car alarm go off, and it scared them enough that I was able to jump in, lock the doors, and floor it out of the parking lot. Didn't give notice, just told the owner I was done, and I still didn't tell anyone about what had happened. Cam kept trying to text me, told me I was denying our destiny and wasn't going to give up on us. I stopped responding, then I blocked his number. Then he'd get new numbers and text again. His text got more threatening as I ignored him. Then I started hearing cars drive by at odd hours of the night, and he would text me, letting me know he was still my dedicated protector and was making sure I was safe. It was obvious one of his buddies was giving him rides to snoop at my house. But all of a sudden, it all stopped. Radio silence. I was so relieved, and 6 months went by with nothing. Then, a random phone call from an unknown number. I was in group chats with other students for projects and thought it was one of them calling me. But it was Cam. He told me he had violated his parole and was in jail the last 6 months. He had thought of me every day. I was his Daisy and he was going to come for me. We would finally be together, and he'd prove to me that we had an undeniable love. That I'd love his dick. He could already feel me riding him and loving it. He thought about it every day in jail. I was just pale as a ghost and speechless. All I could think of was a fake story about going abroad for studies in 2 weeks. He started screaming at me for running away from our connection. He'd find me and come after me no matter where I went. I just hung up the phone, trashed it, and got a new phone with a new number. I deleted my Facebook and finally moved to a large city an hour away. I had to upend my entire life because of this piece of trash, and I was so inexperienced and naive I made so many mistakes. I was just glad the worst case scenario never played out, and it was a steep learning curve that had taught me how to protect myself in the future. This wasn't the last of my weird encounters. One guy at college who transferred to a larger university from our local college got a similar fixation on following me on the larger campus. He had a fetish for being stalked. He would find me at the school union and talk about how hot it would be if he found me going through his trash in the middle of the night. Thankfully, it was a huge campus, and I got friends enlisted to watch out for him and let me know where to avoid. But for fuck's sake, there are so many creeps out there, and it really sucks being a woman. I think someone was just in my house. I don't know what to do. I'm honestly still terrified, but hoping I imagined it. I, 18F, live at home with my 2 parents and my daughter, 2F. I'm on winter break from college and have been picking up more shifts since my mom is off work and willing to watch her, so I have extra money. I was on my phone watching TikTok with my child in front of me playing with one of her Christmas gifts. Suddenly, I hear the back door slam shut and what sounds like running water. I get up, and sure enough, the back door is unlocked with the outside door wide open, and the kitchen sink is running. Our house has a basement, so the stairs are in a small room by the kitchen, so it's essentially 2 back doors. I was the last person in the kitchen beforehand, and the water was off. I let the dogs in, so both doors were shut because the cool air can go through the glass door. We also have cats, but none were in the kitchen. And while the living room, the room I'm in now, is attached to the kitchen, there's about a 3-foot piece of wood acting as a gate so my daughter can't get into things like the pet food, the water bowl, trash, litter box, stove, etc. So it could not have been here. I locked all the doors and all the windows on the 1st and 2nd floor. While upstairs, we only have 2 windows that can be unlocked, and when double checking, I saw a figure moving in the alley behind our garage. Our garage has motion-activated lights that went off as soon as I stepped into the kitchen, meaning that if someone was inside, they would have triggered it. I'm terrified. I don't want to wake my dad up in case no one is there and I sound crazy. I'm hoping I imagined it or it's a bunch of coincidences. For instance, the motion lights go off at every cat, rabbit, or even the neighbor's dog. But I had to turn off the sink, and the door I shut was open. I don't know what to do. We've all thought that someone was frogging because certain windows will be open that have no reason to be. Doors will be unlocked, or random things will appear, like men's pants that were slightly bigger than my size. They weren't mine and far too small to be my dad's because I could fit into them. I'm 5'4", and my dad is over 6 feet tall. I'm lost at what to do, so whoever came into my house and turned on the faucet of all things, let's not meet. Next time, I'm just going to wake up my dad and tell him that I think there's an intruder, but I'm hoping you guys can tell me things to help me believe it's made up. Update. First of all, apologies if this is the wrong way to update, or if the story does not make much sense. Not only was I terrified, but this was my first post. To acknowledge some messages I got first. 1. The house is old. Very old. Built in the 1860s. So groans are common, but this was not a groan. 2. The door that slammed was a hard metal door, so there was a noticeable difference between this door and any other door in our house as they are all wooden. 3. Yes, the TV was on, but similar to the last point, it's a distinctive noise. We were also watching Encanto, and the point it was on was Maribel's first song. My parents' room is relatively close to where I was, but their TV was off. Now to address the comments. Yes, I do know I should have instantly woken up my parents or called the cops, but I was so paranoid at first that I completely felt like it would have done nothing, as they would have been gone very quickly. To leave our backyard from the door is probably about 10 steps, and they could have disappeared in the alley. Foot traffic is common as I live in a small town with a decently high drug presence, so people will walk through the alleys to avoid cops since they rarely drive down them. One person asked about the frogging, so I figured I could go further into detail. We constantly hear what sounds like footsteps when home alone, and even though we have 2 cats and 3 dogs, they cannot go upstairs because of the baby cage that is set up. During the summer, someone also kept messing with the basement door and opening it. The door wasn't a simple knob, it was a weird half door with a broken lock, so you had to literally push the wall away from the door while also pushing the door to get it open. You had to shut it essentially the same way. Because my dad was remodeling it, he made sure to shut it every time so that none of the dogs accidentally stepped on a nail. About twice a week, my dad would come home to it open, so he built a new door with a lock. Only he has the key, and changed the back door lock, which he again is the only one with the key. There was also one day when my mom asked me if I had snuck out, because my dad came home and saw one of the window screens missing and out on the roof. He investigated and found that not only was the window unlocked, but also had white dust which showed hands coming in. To make it worse, it was in my daughter's room, so he immediately put the screen back and nailed the window shut. I think so at least. I just know it cannot be opened. Now onto the actual update. About 3 minutes after the post and probably 8 minutes after the actual events, I realized I was being fucking stupid. If it was just me, I wouldn't have cared. But my daughter changed my life around, and I would do anything to protect her. As I was filling her milk cup preparing to wake my dad and be screamed at, I heard faint tapping outside the house on the glass door. I paused before hearing a loud bang on it. I did what anyone would have done and threw my kid's cup on the ground, ran, and tripped on the gate. I grabbed my daughter and ran into my parents' room and yelled, "There's someone outside!" My dad woke up and grabbed his gun and checked the outside of the house while my mom called the police. They did a small check and said they didn't find any proof someone was there, but I don't think I was crazy. I know I heard it. They've been gone for about an hour, but I'm just now updating because my daughter is asleep. She's in my room. I don't have a lock on my door, but I did push a desk in front of it to keep it shut. I don't have to worry about my window because it faces the front of the house where nothing is underneath it. The window is also broken and will not open from the bottom. Thank you to everyone who commented, even if it was calling me a dumbass for being scared. I don't see any more updates, but if something else that's weird happens, I probably will. Even if it's just a small coincidence. Also, if someone could maybe message me and tell me how to properly update if I did it wrong, I would appreciate it. Have a better night than me, everyone. Edit. One of the comments mentioned it could be my baby daddy messing with me as it's the same house I live in now as I did when we were together. I said he moved away, but there was a funeral in town of one of our mutual friends, and there's a possibility he could be there. I will update on that as well. Update. Hello everyone. Today was the day of the funeral, and because of the instance of how the person died, the family was still unable to get the body as it's in a murder trial. Because of this, we paid our respects to his parents and left. While leaving, I saw a person resembling my ex from behind, so I just quickly drove away. I apologize if it's not the dramatic update you hoped for. One of you guys sent me a link to buy cameras, and those will arrive next Thursday. The morning after the incident, though, I retold my mom what happened, and she looked at me horrified. We tried slamming the back door, and couldn't get it to perfectly match. We tried our heavy wooden gate, and inside it sounded almost exactly like it, meaning someone was still in our backyard at the least. She also said she noticed the basement had its light on. The door remains locked, but there's a small hole in our bathroom floor you can use to see it. It's off now, and can only be turned on if actually in the basement. So if it comes back on, I will look at the cameras and double check along with just checking at its notifications. I see this being the last update, unless something dramatic happens. Bumble BFF date gone wrong. Hi guys, I wanted to share a story that happened a little over a year ago. Remember not to meet strangers from online. I, 24F, moved across the country for the first time. I didn't know anyone, and my line of work is not great for meeting people. I downloaded Bumble BFF as a way to meet friends in my area. I spoke to a few girls, and the first meetup I went to went astonishingly well. So I decided to give it another go, and met with a girl. Let's call her Amber. Amber and I had spoke over BFF for a few days before we decided to meet up for brunch. We meet at a coffee shop, and I notice as soon as she approaches me that she doesn't look too much like her photos. It wasn't a stark difference, but enough to notice. It seemed like the photos could have been of a sister or cousin, or maybe she is just really good at taking pictures. I didn't mind too much as this was not a real date, but it was the first red flag. Within moments of meeting, she immediately starts trauma dumping. During the conversation, she mentions how she doesn't drive and she also has 2 young children. We sit for a while, and it was like I couldn't get a word in. She was bulldozing the whole conversation. I was trying to think of a way to politely leave, but since she doesn't drive, I felt guilty leaving her alone. I finally tell her I need to hit the ladies' room and get on with the rest of my day. She offers to walk me to the restroom. For context, this coffee shop was at an outdoor outlet mall. We had to walk all the way across the mall to reach the restroom, as it wasn't close. While I'm in the stall, I hear, "Mommy!" And when I open the stall, she is now holding a toddler. I'm thinking, where did this child just appear from? She seems just as surprised as I do. She introduces her toddler, who then hisses at me. Kids are strange sometimes, but it just added to the weird energy. I wash my hands and exit the bathroom to see a man with a stroller. She exits the bathroom and introduces her boyfriend. He's very unfriendly, and she pressures me to say hello to her baby in the stroller. I hesitantly pull the cover down and say hello. The baby starts crying, and I feel very uncomfortable. I thank her for meeting with me, and I watch her and her boyfriend walk off to their car. I know she did not drive, so I suspected her partner drove her, but she never mentioned they were also at the mall waiting for us to finish, as it had been hours, or how they ended up in the same ladies' room. I figured maybe he had her location on her phone, or how she must have texted him that brunch was ending, although I never saw her on her phone. After I watch them get into the car, I start to trek back to the other end of the mall when I stop to grab an Auntie Anne's pretzel. I'm waiting in line and get a call from a close friend. I tell her about the strange experience and how her boyfriend appeared out of nowhere, thinking that was the end of it. The man working tells me it will be a few minutes, so I sit down. As I sit down, I see her boyfriend standing in line behind me. I'm horribly embarrassed because although I did not plan on seeing Amber again, it is never my goal to be nasty or hurt anyone's feelings. I make eye contact with him, and between being confused and embarrassed, I decide to leave without getting my pretzel and start heading back towards my car. As I'm walking back towards my car, I look behind me, and her partner is now deliberately following me. Thoughts are racing through my head. If he had been waiting the whole time, why hadn't he gotten something to eat before? How did he know which area of the mall we were in? Why was he following me? Was he going to confront me if he heard my conversation on the phone? Every time I looked over my shoulder, he was still there. I'm now running through the rest of the mall. I tell my friend on the phone if I don't call her back in 5 minutes, to call my spouse and the police. I finally get to my car, and I can see him storming through the parking lot after me. I get out of there as quickly as I can. My heart is pounding in my ears, and once I'm about halfway home, I call my friend and let her know that I'm okay. I get home, tell my spouse about it, and I decided to delete my Bumble BFF account, as well as block her on Snapchat, which was the only other social media account I had friended her on. A day later, she finds me on Instagram, which I had not given to her. She sends me a message that says, "Hey girlie, I had a great time at brunch. We should all hang out again soon." I blocked her on Instagram as well, and thank God I have not heard from her since. I'm not sure what their intentions were, and truly, I don't want to find out. I walked into a cult, or a mafia meeting, or a drug ring. I can't figure out which. I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, but have lived in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area all my life. Earlier this season, when the Pirates were in Chicago, I decided to go to a sports bar to watch the game. Specifically one I've driven past a bunch of times but never given a try. Pittsburgh Sports Bar in Castle Shannon. I went in there about 5 to 10 minutes before the first pitch in my Cubs gear, and there was one woman tending the bar with an old couple sitting at the end of the bar. They both stared at me as I came in as if I was an alien. Figured it was because I was wearing opposing team's gear. No greeting or anything. I sat myself down and just waited for the game to start, but I realized that the old couple and bartender were deep in conversation, and they were fixated on each other. I walked up to the bar to try and order food. There were no menus, napkins, salt, pepper, or anything on the table, indicating there was food served there. As I started talking to the bartender, I noticed there was no bottles, taps, or any alcohol behind the bar at all. It was just a bunch of random Pittsburgh sports memorabilia. Very random things too. Nothing really followed a theme, as well as a bunch of signs saying things similar to, "If you're easily offended, get out," and the like. When I was talking to the bartender, the old couple was just staring at me blankly. She told me she'd be right back out with the menu, and she was in the back room for a good 10 minutes or so before bringing me a menu. It was really odd, but I ordered anyway. I ended up getting a pizza slice and a wing and fry basket combo. It was ridiculously cheap. I paid like $6 for all of it. And the pizza slice was massive. There were a dozen huge wings and the basket of fries was giant. I felt like anywhere else, this would have cost well over $20. The food was done in just a few minutes and it was brought out to me by the bartender. What's weird is, she went into the kitchen, or what I presume to be the kitchen, to seemingly cook it herself. I got a glimpse of the kitchen when she opened the door and it was almost completely empty. There were no cooks, no sounds of ovens or fryers or anything. The wings were really, really good, and so were the fries. Easily the best wings and fries I've ever had. The pizza was immaculate as well. It was almost too good, and as soon as I got my food, more people started coming in. Some very strange individuals too. I was watching the game by this point, but would frequently side-eye and observe what was going on. I was at the table closest to the door and by the biggest TV, but everyone else that came in sat at the very end of the bar, as far away from me as possible. Them, the old couple, and the bartender just were non-stop talking, and talking very quietly. I could not make out what they were saying. They all looked like statues. They never changed facial expressions even when talking. Just completely straight faces. None of them ever ordered anything at all. It was more like a social than anything. That's weird enough, but some of the other stranger actions I noticed are as follows. There was not a single person wearing any sort of Pittsburgh sports gear. All the most bland, boring outfits imaginable. It was a Saturday 2 p.m. game. There should have been plenty of Pirates fans watching the game and getting drunk with their buddies, but nope, not one. Whenever the Pirates scored or did anything good, there was not a reaction from anybody. No cheers, no groans. It's like the game wasn't even on, yet they were all glued to the screens watching it, while having these conversations with the bartender. The man from the old couple was the strangest. Every 5 minutes or so, he would walk over to the video slot machine right by my table and put in a $20 bill and bet it all at once, losing every single time. He did this for probably an hour and a half. Towards the end of the game, he proceeded to walk over to the Touch Tunes machine and put in a $20 bill and put on the strangest, most vintage sounding dance music I've ever heard. Like, not any big names at all, just very random. Like hole in the wall ice cream social playlist of the most 1930s underground songs possible. For whatever reason, they had it so the Touch Tunes took over the TV audio so I could no longer hear the game. I guess it was a way to drive me out of there. Finally, after a good half hour or so, the game ended, and the Touch Tunes playlist was still going. It had been about 3 hours since I placed my order, and the bartender never came to check in on me, nor give me my check. I went up to ask for the check myself, and she looked a little confused. Before giving me my check, she went over to the group of 5 to 6 people sitting at the end of the bar, said something to them, and they all proceeded to get up and walk out the back door together. She went to the back of the kitchen, came out a few minutes later with my check, and I paid. I then left. I was already kind of uneasy and started to feel something was off, and when I left, one of the strange people at the end of the bar was outside the door and tried to strike up a conversation about Chicago or whatever, but I just mumbled a vague answer and got in my car and got out of there. Did I walk in on a cult, a genuine mafia area, or a drug ring? Stories from my wild past. I was younger and much more naive than I am currently, and a huge pot smoker. I had just moved to Raleigh, North Carolina from California, so my medical marijuana card didn't transfer across states. I was constantly looking for connects, often walking up to random strangers with a $20 bill in hand, wanting to buy a gram or so. The bus stop in downtown Raleigh had a tunnel that you walk through to get to it, and dealers often hung out by the entrance, so I'd walk up to them, $20 in hand, asking for a gram or so. Mind you, I was a 20-year-old scrawny dude who dressed pretty outrageously because this was my normal attire in California, and I stuck out like a sore thumb. This would turn a lot of dealers off, as they thought I was a narc and would often refuse. I knew an older man who I'd become acquainted with who always had good weed, so when he was there, he could vouch for me. One time I went to the tunnel and he wasn't there, so I asked the random if he knew where to get weed. He said, "Yes, do you have any money?" And I handed him the 20. He said something like, "Cool, I'll hop in your car and direct you." As I said, I was much more naive back then and agreed. He directed me to what I'd consider the hood in a pretty rough part of Raleigh, and told me to wait in front of a dilapidated house while he went in. So I waited. It was around 10 minutes that I was parked in front of this random house, just chilling in my car, and my heart rate was slowly going up. I had no clue what was happening inside of this house, or if he would come back out again, and just kept the money. Finally, he opened the door and motioned me to come in. I should mention that I was and still am 6 foot tall, but I've always been relatively scrawny. This man towered over me, probably somewhere around 6'5" and easily twice my weight. Anyways, I followed him inside of this house. The lights were all off, and immediately upon opening the door, I realized it was a hoarder house. He told me to follow him, and I walked on and over piles of garbage, through a small walkway cut through the piles and into a tiny bedroom. He opened the door, and inside was more trash. On the bed, the floors, just everywhere I looked. Sitting on the bed was an old, fat lady in a nightgown. She was completely blind, and I'm not exaggerating, was staring at an old TV which was playing gray static on no particular channel, with white noise in the background. My heart rate spiked as I realized that the man behind me had shut the door. He sat down onto the bed and pulled out a crack pipe. He began to load it with what I assume was crack cocaine, a little white rock, and lit the pipe, inhaling it. He coughed and passed the pipe to the lady, who took a big hit and began mumbling random incoherent things. I was beginning to have an anxiety attack as the man passed the pipe to me. I said, "No thanks, man. I just wanted to find some weed. I don't smoke anything else." He said, "Smoke this." And I said again, "No thanks, man. I really just wanted weed." And before I could finish, he said, "Nah, man, smoke this." At this point, I was feeling incredibly uncomfortable and really intimidated. As I started, this guy was way bigger and taller than me. I had never smoked crack in my life and never wanted to either. Reluctantly, I took the pipe and brought it to my lips, taking the tiniest hit I possibly could, and tried not to inhale, blowing it out as soon as I had taken it in. I saw that as my opportunity to leave, as I knew he wouldn't have any weed by that point. I jumped off the bed and got out of there as fast as I could. I kept looking over my shoulder to see if anyone would come out of the house, but no one ever did. I got into my car feeling strange as my lips and mouth tingled with this disgusting metallic taste. Needless to say, I guess I did get pretty high, and don't hardly remember my drive home. You'd think that situation would be enough to turn me off to meeting and giving random people rides. But alas, this was not the case. Either way, random giant man and blind blank TV staring lady. Let's not meet again. This leads me to story number 2. I don't remember how much longer after the first situation that this one happened, but it couldn't have been more than a few months. I had just gotten back into my car after a long workday, and after smoking some weed in one of my favorite parking structures in downtown Raleigh, I was about to head home, windows down, and about to play some good music, when a random lady yelled at me from about 100 feet away. I couldn't hear what she was saying, and was a little leery of strangers by this point, but still, naive as ever. I yelled out my window, "What?" And she began to walk closer to my car. She was emaciated and looked pretty terrible with gaunt facial features and a rail-thin body. I immediately could see that she was an addict of some sort. She was probably in her late 50s, but looked to be about 70, as happens when you've been addicted for God only knows how long. She got to my car and was relatively lucid, asking me if I could give her a ride down the street. I knew now that the lucidity was because she had been high when she talked to me, and this is relevant because her behavior completely changed only a few minutes after I'd agreed to let her into my car. She began giving me directions, telling me to turn left here, right here, etc. So after a few more turns, she began to get somewhat confused, losing her sense of direction. I said, "Look, I really want to be going home now. Is this place close?" To which she replied, a little manically, "It's just right down this way." So I turned where she directed me. Another few minutes came and went, and she was starting to become agitated because she couldn't remember where she wanted to go. At this point, I just wanted to go home, so I said, "I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to drop you off here. I need to get back home." When I said this, she immediately became hysteric and started crying and mumbling at me in the saddest sob I've ever heard. It was a mixture between a croak and a cry. "No, please. It's just right here. Please." And she tried to grab my steering wheel and pull it up towards a street that I had been hoping she wasn't leading me down, as at the time, I had known it was a place where all manner of dealings went down. I was incredibly familiar with downtown Raleigh at that point, and Swain Street was not a place where anyone would want to be found, day or night, even with someone else in the car. So I told her, "Don't touch my steering wheel. You need to get out right now." And I pulled the car to the side of the curb onto Swain Street. She proceeded to put her skinny hands around my throat, half-heartedly choking me and begging me to keep going. I was more annoyed than worried at that point, as she was so frail that I knew she couldn't hurt me. So, unfortunately, I obliged. I drove further down the street and saw at least 20 men open-carrying guns dealing from the corner of the street, hanging out on porches and smoking weed and crack. I was immediately nervous and just wanted to get the hell out of there and go home to lay down. I pried her hands off my neck and said, "If you touch me again, you're getting out of my car." I should have kicked her out long before that. However, she then said to me, "Pull over right here." So I did. Immediately, 3 or 4 dudes started canvassing my car, looking through the windows. She rolled down my passenger window and started yelling at anyone who would listen. "Hey, hey!" And a man walked up to my car. I'm trying to make myself small as I'm in way over my head by this point. The guy says, "What you want?" And I said, "Nothing, dude. I don't know this lady and I just want to go home." And he says, "So you don't want to buy?" And I said, "No, I don't know this woman and I never should have let her into my car." And he then says, "Okay, I'm gonna help you out. I see her staying over by the corner across the street. She strips for money. I'll show you where to drop her off." Then he proceeds to get into my car without even asking. Now him and the crackhead lady are arguing all the way while he's directing me where to drop her off. Eventually it gets so heated that he says to me, "Alright, stop here." I stop. He proceeds to the front seat, opens the door and grabs her hair and yanks her out of the seat and onto the curb. He then gets into the front seat and shuts the door. All nonchalantly he says, "Hey man, could you buy me a sandwich at this gas station and drop me off?" And I was just so tired at that point that I said, "Sure man, you helped me out, so I'll help you out." I dropped him off at the gas station and gave him $10 and got the fuck out of there. One of the scariest moments in my life. I try to stay soft and not too much details. I have 2 stories I wish I could forget, but they'll probably never leave me. I am almost 30, and it's time to get this off my chest. I was 16 at the time, and I used to work occasionally with a family member to earn a bit of pocket money. During breaks, I would secretly go outside and smoke a cigarette. The employees from the neighboring business would come out at the same time. There was this man, around 45 years old, who often smoked at the same time as me. We made small talk about customers, weather, mall gossip, nothing special. One day, he told me he had just moved near my place. He knew where my family lived because they were on good terms. He said he was throwing a housewarming party and had invited everyone from both workplaces, a big party, and told me to come. At that age, I was incredibly naive. I loved going out because I felt deeply lonely and sad. Never had a boyfriend, boring life, etc. Any excuse to escape from home felt good. So on the day, I went, rang the doorbell, and he opened it. He let me in and immediately locked the door behind me, putting the key in his underwear. I looked and quickly realized something was wrong. There was no one else there. I asked where everyone was, and he said they had already come earlier and left. I reminded him that he had said the party started at 2 p.m., but he mumbled something about them coming earlier. Great. I soon noticed he was tipsy. We talked for about 5 minutes, then he offered to show me the house, which honestly was very nice. When we reached the bedroom, he said, "Here's your room. Look, You even have a big walk-in closet just for you. I can make more space if you need." In my head, I was like, "Error 404. I laughed nervously and said something like, "Haha, you're right. You're funny." We went back to the living room, sat down, and then he suddenly jumped on me, trying to, you know. He touched under my clothes, kissed me, partially removed his clothes, so I tried to push him away, and luckily he was more drunk than I thought. One big kick was enough to knock him to the floor. Sitting there confused, he said, "I don't understand. You don't want to? All those times you smiled at me, waved to say hello, talked to me while smoking, laughed at my jokes." I felt pure disgust rising inside me. Those words made my stomach turn. His stupidity made me dissociate. I told him I appreciated talking to him at work, but that was it. We were just colleagues. I left it vague because I was afraid he might get angry, and that's when he completely lost it. "My ex-wife has the same name as you. She has the same beauty mark, the same mixed origins, the same face, hair, body. You're her twin. In better. When I saw you, I couldn't believe my eyes. You're so beautiful, like a younger, sweeter version of her. That bitch. Anyway, we'll see how we're going to arrange the house for you. Our future children, buying it wasn't the hard part." That's when I knew I was in real danger. Honestly, I saw myself die every time his heavy body leaned towards me. A man twice my size, drunk, psychotic, the full package. At some point, he went to the bedroom to pee. With how much alcohol he had, it took him a good 10 minutes. He asked me to come with him, but I said no, I'm tired. During that time, I called one of my coworkers, the man who was responsible for me at work. I explained everything and begged him to get me out. Unfortunately, he wasn't in town. He had trouble believing his friend could do something like this. Then he told me to try to leave by force, and if it didn't work, he would drive back from his weekend location to come get me. I told him to forget it. My brain was racing at 10,000 kilometers an hour. He told me to stay calm and call the police, but I had to hang up because the psycho came out of the bathroom. If you're wondering why I didn't call my parents, it's simple. They would have thought I was stupid for falling into that situation. My parents were the type to hit me for much less, and I wanted to avoid that. I tried again to say I needed to leave, and that's when he said the sentence that completely broke me. "You're not going back. We're going to have so much fun." I was stunned, dissociated, frozen. No reaction at all. He tried several times to sleep with me. Each time, I managed to distract him, talk about a topic, anything. Pure survival mode. I told myself my only chance was to play along until I found a way out. Late in the evening, I had been trapped there from 2 p.m. until 10 p.m. I pretended I needed clothes and medication, but that idiot had planned everything. Old clothes from his ex-wife, aka my twin apparently, and he was getting tired from the alcohol and weed, his eyes closing on the couch. I told him I needed a very specific medication, that I would go get it and come right back. A quick round trip. He made me promise, then kissed me for a long time. But I stayed in character, acting sweet, just for my life. He opened the door and told me that if I wasn't back by midnight sharp, he would call my mother's boss and get her fired and lie about the situation and then hurt my mom. He watched me until I turned to the corner of the street, another glass in hand. After crying all the tears in my body, in a completely broken state, I started walking towards my home. What was I going to tell my parents? My mother knew I was supposed to be at a housewarming. What if she got hurt because of me, or loses her job? What would I do? That's when, out of nowhere, my guardian angel appeared on a bike. "Hey, got a cigarette for me?" Me crying and shaking. "Yeah, here." "Whoa, why all the tears? What's wrong, kid? Tell me." I told the story, barely able to speak, hyperventilating, but I told him everything. If I don't go back, my mom's going to get in trouble." He stopped and asked me to show him the house. I refused to go back, but he convinced me I'd be safe. So we walked a bit, and I showed him exactly where it was. He said, "All right, I've already seen him. Listen, you go home, you sleep, and you forget this story, okay?" Me, "But if I don't go back to him?" "Don't even think about it. Forget it all. I'll text you tomorrow morning, okay?" "Okay." I went home. I was terrified, traumatized, but I eventually fell asleep shaking. The next morning, around 8 p.m., I received a message from the bike thug. "Everything's fine. I hope you slept well despite everything. Have a nice day." I just answered, "What happened? Thank you so much." And he just sent a winky face. The day passed and no news from the psycho. The day after that one, I ran into a coworker outside. He said, "Damn, did you hear what happened to him? He just moved in and already moved out in 2 days." I asked how that was possible, and he replied, "Some people broke into his place at night and destroyed everything. Absolutely everything, including his teeth. He doesn't have any front teeth left. He could barely talk when he came to pick up his stuff at work." That disgusting predator. I want to thank again my lucky star, the man I never saw again after that night. Real saviors exist. Real men exist. I will forever be grateful. X. Let's never meet again. And yes, later I filed a complaint about him, without any news though. Don't be kind to a social pariah. I met him in high school. At first, it was harmless. We talked for a couple of weeks, but I quickly realized something felt off. His face is also weird. It's disfigured like Freddy Krueger. I pulled back and tried to treat him like a friend instead, but he didn't accept that. Instead, he inserted himself into my social circle, talking to my friends, former friends, and anyone who would listen, spreading a false narrative about me. If I didn't give him attention, he became verbally abusive. If I tried to set boundaries, he pushed me for it. We lived in the same neighborhood and went to the same school, so avoiding him was nearly impossible. Over time, his attachment grew more intense and more unstable. He followed me home once after being kicked out by his mother. I felt pressured into letting him stay nearby, even though I was deeply uncomfortable. One night, after my friend accidentally sent him a blunt message telling him to stop trauma dumping, he responded by sending images of fresh self-harm. I was disgusted by him, but I still tried to semi-comfort this adult man baby with the emotional regulation skills of a piece of bread. In response to me attempting and failing to cut him off, he lured a young girl off an app called Yubo, claiming he was 17 to her. He is in fact not remotely 17. He proceeded to give the girl chlamydia. When confronted, he tried to flip the script like people would really believe that a social pariah could be overpowered by an underweight 5'1" child. Then, things escalated. He began trying to isolate me, luring me to places where no one else was around. On more than one occasion, he behaved inappropriately and tried to coerce me into sexual situations. I repeatedly said no, clearly and explicitly, but it didn't matter. Eventually, we spent an entire day together running errands. Towards the end, he began acting entitled to my belongings, telling me I owed him for his time. When I tried to leave, he became agitated and accused me of seeing someone else. He grabbed at my clothing and tried to stop me from leaving. I locked myself in a public bathroom and stayed there for nearly an hour while he waited outside. I was terrified, so I texted my family, begging someone to come get me. My brother arrived first, and only then did he leave. After that, the harassment turned vindictive. He gave my personal information to unsafe people. I began receiving threatening messages, and when I confronted him, he accused me of being mentally unstable and tried to convince me that I was the abuser. Then the messages multiplied. He contacted me from dozens of numbers, sending disturbing images, threats, and cryptic messages. He showed up at a neighbor's house, believing I lived there, and waited on their porch for hours. He harassed all my neighbors since he wasn't sure where I lived, sending them odd choices of gifts such as cat food and water buckets. Then he involved my family. He spammed my mother with graphic images and non-stop calls until her phone became unusable. She had to change her number, wipe her device, and lost years of photos and data in the process. He somehow found my sister's number too. She had to change hers as well. We installed security cameras and spent hundreds of dollars trying to protect ourselves from someone who wouldn't let go. Eventually, I learned he had been hospitalized and diagnosed with severe mental health conditions. That didn't undo the damage, and it didn't make what he did okay. It didn't make me feel safer either. I was just trying to be kind to someone who seemed lonely. I learned the hard way that kindness without boundaries can be dangerous. So, to the guy who turned my life and my family's lives upside down. Let's not meet. Ever. I was once mugged, and I am convinced that it was a setup. I moved to East Los Angeles the summer after high school. My parents bought the house from my aunt and uncle who had just moved out. We already had family in that area, so it felt familiar. The neighborhood was nice and quiet. The plan was for me to live with my parents and save money while I figured out what I wanted next. I was getting ready to start community college and applied to a medical assistant program. Back then, everyone had an opinion about East LA. People loved to describe it as dangerous, even though most of them had never been there. I grew up visiting my cousins in that same area, and it was never as dramatic as people made it sound. These places are not scary to me. They're just neighborhoods where people live. I met Michael at my cousin's house party that summer. He had tattoos and looked edgy. When he asked me out, I said yes. I was flattered and curious what he would be like. He told me he knew a place with the best guava nectar in town and that we could go to a drive-in movie afterward. I actually laughed. I like guava nectar, but I had never heard anyone hype it up like that. But like I said, I was curious and I agreed. He parked at the drive-in first, and he said we could leave the car there, walk to the restaurant, and come back for the movie. We even asked the employees if that was okay, and they said yes, as long as we paid a small fee, which he did. Something about that plan felt strange. The restaurant was about a 20-minute walk away, and the movie started at 9 p.m. It was close to 8. I asked him if it was smart to walk by ourselves so late. He smiled and said he thought I was not afraid of neighborhoods like this since I had spent so much time in East LA. He said it like a challenge. I remembered mentioning that earlier, and he used my own words to keep me from saying no, so I went along with it. Very few people were on the street, and it was dark. As we got closer to the restaurant, he stopped a few times to show me videos on his phone. There were silly clips that he thought were funny. I was uneasy about the walk. It felt like Michael wanted it to last longer than it should have. Something was off. And looking back, I think Michael was stalling. Then a car pulled up beside us. A masked man got out and walked towards us. For a second, I thought it might be a prank like for a YouTube video. Then I heard his voice, and he said, "I need your phone and wallet." I remember thinking he sounded young, maybe high school age. He also sounded nervous and out of breath. I can't prove this, but I could tell this was not something he had done before. This was the only time I'd ever been mugged, and I don't know what other muggers sound like, but I just know that guy had never done it before. I think he was hesitating. At one point, I even remember the driver yelled, "Hurry up, man." He yelled back, "I am hurrying, bro. She's right here." He kept looking at Michael. Michael looked back, and I could not see their faces. But something in that moment told me they knew each other. He took my wallet and phone, then ran back to the car, and they drove away. Michael stood still. He did not help, but to be fair, I don't know what he could have done. You never know what someone with a gun might do if you make the wrong move. I was in shock, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I told Michael we should go to the police. He kept insisting we should still get guava nectar so I could calm down. I had just been robbed, and he was offering me juice. I had no phone and no way to call anyone, and somehow we were still walking to get guava nectar. We got the nectar and then walked back. When we finally got to the car, I told him again that I wanted to go to the police. This time, I said that if he refused, I would ask somebody else in the parking lots to call. He finally said okay. At the station, we gave our statements and it got even stranger. I said the car was gray because I knew what I saw. Michael said it was white. I said there had been a driver who yelled, "Hurry up, man." And Michael said there was no driver, that it was the same person who got back into the driver's seat of the car and drove himself off. He kept adding little changes. The officers were polite, but I could feel their patience thinning. When they realized we were giving them two different stories, one of them sighed. She said she could not really investigate if two people who were both there could not agree on what happened. I knew right then, they're not going to investigate this any further. Michael drove me home. When my parents found out what had happened, they were furious. My mom told me never to talk to Michael again. She did not need to repeat herself. Thankfully, I did not lose much. My wallet was easy to replace, and I needed a new phone anyway. I have lived in East LA ever since that summer. 8 years later, I have never had another bad experience here. The more I think about that night, the more I'm convinced that Michael planned it. I can still remember how he stalled to give them more time to come and mug me. I can still remember how calm he stayed through all of it. I can still remember how he tried to give the police completely different information from what had really happened. No way that was all an accident. Since then, I've seen Michael a few times at different things. He always wants to make small talk and invite me to things. I keep my guard up and don't agree to anything. Creepy backyard man. Back in late 2023, I began seeing a man in my neighborhood walking his dog. I would see him in the morning when I went to work, maybe 2 to 3 times a week. He was an average looking guy, maybe in his 60s. I would see him again regularly when I came home. Since I worked an 8 to 5, I didn't think much of it, just assumed we had similar schedules. He always wore the same blue jacket, which I also didn't think much of because it looked like a rain or wind jacket, so I thought it was just what he threw on to walk the dog. He would stare a lot when he walked by, but again, assumed maybe he was a lonely guy. One day, I asked him if he had got the end of the year letter from the HOA, and he seemed confused. I repeated myself, and he said he hadn't received anything yet. Wrote this off as well because I assumed he was caught off guard. I had been seeing him daily for months, but we never spoke. He genuinely seemed shocked by me speaking to him. I told him to keep a lookout for it, and he just stared and went back to walking his golden retriever. I began seeing him even more after this. By Christmas, I was seeing him at least once a day, if not twice. I treated him like every other neighbor, and did a quick neighbor wave when I saw him walking his dog. In March, I separated from my husband. He moved out and took the dog. He owned him before I came along, so I understood. Since I was alone and sad, my mom stayed with me a while. She doesn't work, so she would be at my house during the day while I was gone. She noted the same guy always walking by. She noticed he always stared too, and that it was kind of odd. She waved hello to him a few times, but he never did anything but stare and walk his dog. She said since he walked the dog often, but also seemingly on a schedule, he could have early onset dementia, or maybe sick somehow, and using the dog walks as a way to get exercise. We agreed he was very odd but harmless. After a month or so, my mom went back to her house and I was living alone. One thing I loved about that house was the fact that the backyard butted up to a national park. Beyond my fence was trees and forest. After my husband and dog left, I would be sitting in the backyard and hear what sounded like footsteps. It was almost always late at night when I'd be sneaking out for a late night cig before bed. I was drinking a good amount at the time, so I figured 1, I was paranoid, 2, I was probably hearing raccoons or opossums in the woods, and 3, having the dog before would have scared off any critters. It didn't happen every night, far enough apart that I was able to write it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My fence had horizontal planks rather than your more standard vertical style. There are gaps you could see through if you were right on it. I looked over the fence in the daylight for a sign of anyone back there. The National Forest kept firebreak cleared between the edge of the park and the back of homeowners' property, so it was difficult to tell if anyone had been there or not. Eventually, I started noticing lighters and cigarettes missing from the backyard. I would swear I had an almost full pack going to bed, but when I checked the next day, it would be half empty. I wrote this all off due to my heavy drinking. My cousins started coming over and helping me do some handiwork around the house on the weekends. The neighbor guy in the blue coat would walk his dog every day still, but he would now stop and watch my cousins from the sidewalk as they did work at the house. He would let the leash out for the dog to come up to them, but they didn't pet it because it smelled awful. I told them the theory that my mom said, that he was sick and weird and harmless, but they didn't agree. And the next time he let the dog into the driveway, my cousins told him to fuck off. From what they told me, he just stared at them for a while then walked off. From then, the man would still stare, but it was even creepier. When I would drive by, he would stop and watch me, as in physically turn his body to follow my car as I went by. I would wave as if it were any other neighbor, as I always did, and he didn't flinch. Around June, a friend of mine moved in. She was going through a divorce as well, and I was happy to have someone to hang out with after work. We had a lot of fun drinking and burning fires in the fire pit, and it began again, the sound of footsteps in the woods. We were both drunk, so we ran inside and laughed it off. This happened a handful of times over the next few months. I would hear things more often when I was alone. My roommate split her time, so she was never with me on the weekend. She had noted the creepy guy with his dog. He seemed to be walking his dog when I left for work at 7:30, and again when she was leaving work around 8:30. He would let his dog out to her daily, and she would pet the dog at first, but she stopped because the dog smelled so bad, and the man never spoke. He just stared. She started being creeped out too. She said he seemed friendly enough until she stopped petting his dog, and his stare shifted to being mean too. He began stopping to watch her drive as well. Then one day, I saw it. I saw him down out past the entrance of the neighborhood and at the tree line to the forest. He was clearly walking into the woods. That's when it clicked. Why he wore the same clothes every day. Why he seemed to be there with his dog every day we left the house. Why they smelled so bad. Why I was hearing things in the woods. I almost began to panic. Surely a man isn't living in the woods watching me. Surely this man hasn't been watching me through my fence for almost half a year at this point. The whole time this was happening, the house next door was empty. It was a rental, and the previous tenants left and it sat. I started thinking back and I began to see the man sometime after the previous tenants moved out. I tried best not to panic and started looking into trail cameras to film behind my fence. I told my roommate about the theory, and she said I sounded crazy at first. She jokingly started yelling out for him to go away and leave us alone. Then, we literally started hearing footsteps in the woods at that moment, and ran inside. Before I could even order a camera, they rented the house next door. It was just days after I told my roommate what I thought was going on. A family with a dog and 2 kids moved in. The last time I saw that man walking his dog was the morning the family moved in, because I came home from work to see the moving truck. When I introduced myself to the new neighbors, I asked about the woods behind their house. They didn't have a fence. I asked if they found anything back there and they said they did, but it was just random junk they threw out. I didn't say anything more. I contemplated telling them, but figured I would sound insane. I believe this man was living behind their house and watching me through my fence. I never had cameras in the backyard, so I can't say for certain if he ever crossed the fence. Since I never saw him again, I decided his cover was blown, and he moved on to watch other people. I stayed in that home until October 2025. Literally never saw the guy ever again after that day. They were waiting for us in the bushes. Thank God for hotboxing. This happened around 2016, and is still what I would call the scariest moment of my life. I was in my freshman year of university, and myself and a few friends decided it would be a lovely idea to travel just outside of the town, to this view on a hill which was a pretty popular spot for many students and locals. We were even more excited to hotbox our friend's car, get super stoned, and watch the sunset. For some context, I live in a pretty dangerous country where you do have to be pretty aware of your surroundings at all times. Even though it is a student town, it still had its fair share of robberies, muggings, and even the occasional act of violence, stabbing, or even murder. You do, however, get used to it once you're an adult, and if you have never experienced crime or true fear, you naively go around never expecting something sinister. The spot we went to did have a fair share of muggings and scares over the years for some, but we didn't even think twice. We pulled up when the sun still had about 30 to 45 minutes of visibility, and began the smoking session. Everything was going well, and we were cracking jokes and very happy with just getting through an intense week. I noticed no other cars around, and was pretty happy about it, as it didn't really feel comfortable smoking and hotboxing in a car in the presence of others. After gazing at the beautiful sun and talking to my best friend, I turned my head to the right to look out the passenger window, and that's when I saw them. 4 men, torn up outfits, crouched in the bushes no more than 20 feet away, staring and waiting like lions with their prey, just hoping for us to open those doors and get out of the car. What was even more terrifying was how focused they all seemed on us. I immediately shouted at my friend who was driving, "There's guys in the bushes waiting for us. Drive!" And he accelerated and drove off without a second's hesitation. When we were no more than 50 meters down the dirt road, I looked back and saw 2 men walking onto the road just staring as we jetted off. Of course, we were all quite shaken up when we got back home, and were just grateful we never left the car and noticed them when we did. Best case scenario was that they were going to mug us, I still to this day try to avoid thinking about the worst case, and even recounted it to one of my friends who was there that day, and he agrees that those men had evil intentions by the look on their face and the reputation of gangsters and desperate people in our country. So, to the 4 men who were waiting for us, let's not meet again. Late night visitors. About 5 years ago, me and my family moved houses. We only moved a couple streets away from our previous house. Our new home was nice, but a bit of a fixer-upper. It needed a lot of work and it didn't have a burglar alarm, which was weird. Anyway, the very first night we have in the house, we're all asleep upstairs. It's me and my wife in our room, my daughter in her room, and my son in his. I get woken up by something walking into our room. It was my 4-year-old son, rubbing his eyes and saying he has been woken up by banging noises. I tell him to get into our bed. The bed is too small for me to fit in now, so I swap beds with him. I lie down in his bed, and after a few seconds, I hear the same banging noises that he had mentioned. I wasn't sure what it was, so I went to check. I walked out of my son's bedroom to go take the stairs down. At the top of the stairs is a window that if you look out and look down, you can see the side of our house. And beneath that window is a back door that goes straight into our kitchen. I look out to see if I can see anything that might be causing the noise. And that's when I see it. There are about 4 or 5 men casually dressed in ski masks and big coats all standing outside the side door. They have the lights of their phones all shining on our door, and one guy at the front of the group is yanking the door handle off the door, trying to break in. It takes me a second to comprehend what I'm looking at, and realize this isn't a dream. I don't know why I did this next thing, but this is how I handled it. I casually opened the window, poked my head out, and looked down at the 4 or 5 men trying to break in and said, "Excuse me guys, could you fuck off please?" I didn't even say it in an angry voice. I was quite calm, but the other weird thing was they just all immediately turned about and walked off, as if they had been waiting for a train and had just heard an announcement that the train was cancelled, and they just wandered away looking for alternative forms of transport. There was no urgency, no scrambling away. We rang the police straight away and didn't sleep at all that night. It freaked us out because this was the first day in our new home. I have to admit, I hated the house after that. I didn't feel safe and wanted to move back into our old home. The next day the police came and we got a burglar alarm and added new locks on the doors and a spotlight outside the front door. We found out that a gang had been going around and robbed a bunch of other houses nearby the same night. We checked the damage and the door handle was hanging on by a thread. They were probably seconds away from getting in. It still freaks me out that if my son hadn't woken me up, I wouldn't have slept in his bed, and I wouldn't have heard the banging, and I wouldn't have seen them outside my door and stopped them just in time. It's weird as well that they responded to me calmly telling them to fuck off. I scared away a serial stabber, but this story still does not have a happy ending. This happened around a decade ago, when I was your quintessential, angsty, weird little teenager, quite moody and angry at the world. Ironically, that is what ultimately saved me, but the guilt doesn't leave me. I have never fully shared this with anyone before. My family lived in one of the nicer neighborhoods of my city, and unfortunately, muggings weren't uncommon, though to my knowledge at the time, none had resulted in anyone's death. I wasn't really following the neighborhood news, or any news really. I could tell my mother was getting increasingly worried over the past few months, but I just didn't care enough to ask why. She kept reminding me to lock all the doors, travel in groups, not to talk to strangers, yada yada yada. The same spiel most parents give their kids, only I took insult about being lectured weekly about safety at 16. Our first fight about this happened when I was told I was not allowed to walk home from the train anymore. I was taking some extracurricular lessons at the center of the city, and rode the train to the end of the line where we lived, which was in no way remote. Our apartment building was about a 10-minute walk from the station, and I had been doing that distance since I was little. I could literally do it with my eyes closed. I usually walked around with my headphones on and my old and much beloved CD player in my bag, listening to something loud and grungy, feeling completely safe in my little bubble of melodious solitude. Lots of yelling and screaming. Lots of, "You still treat me like a child. You don't trust me. You are suffocating me. You are taking away my freedom. You're the world's worst mother ever. Drama. You get the idea. Eventually, we came to a compromise. As long as there was still light out, I could walk home. Otherwise, I'd give her a call and she would come pick me up. I was fine with that for the time. On that particular night, however, I was really, really angry. Don't ask me what about. I honestly don't remember the reason. I just remember the wrath. I wanted to scream bloody murder, and the feeling got even more exacerbated when I realized I had to call my mommy to pick me up. Nope, no way I was doing that. Didn't matter that it was raining. I wasn't a baby or made of sugar. I got out of the train, ignored the heavy rain, and marched straight home. On the outside, I must have looked like a normal 16-year-old listening to some music while hurrying home. But on the inside, I was preparing to crush my enemies, see them kneeling before me, and hear the lamentation of their women. The way from the station to my home was pretty well lit, except for one turn. Back then, there were unkept hedges on both sides of the corner, one in front of the abandoned lot, and no streetlights at all for about 100 feet. I approached the turn, completely oblivious of my surroundings, internally planning my revenge against a yet unidentified foe, when someone jumped out besides me from the bushes, wielding a large kitchen knife. Most of what follows, I remember in a blur. I don't remember what he looked like. It was dark and he was wearing a hood. I remember he smelled strongly of medicinal alcohol, but I honestly don't recall him saying anything. He probably didn't have enough time to anyway, because when he jumped out of the shadows, I was so startled, I dropped my Discman. And that was it. I saw red, and I completely lost it on the guy. All of the day's frustration pulled out of me, like a dam breaking, and I unleashed a torrent of swear words at him, most of which I made up on the spot. I completely ignored the knife, shoved him back hard, and kept screaming, "Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me right now?" Over and over, and bent over to pick up my shattered CD player. I don't know what he did, and to this day, I don't know why he didn't attack me when I was crouched down. But when I gathered all the pieces and I stood up, he was nowhere to be seen. Holding the pieces of my broken Discman and CD, I continued my march home, muttering a variation of, "Great, just great, that's just perfect. What else is going to happen today to make this day even shittier?" And occasionally turning around to yell another, "Fuck you, man," at the general direction of the guy. When I got home, I got straight into a fight with a furious mother for not calling her, and made sure not to mention what happened out of fear that it would give credence to her side. The gravity of it all hit me in the shower, after the adrenaline had subsided, and yet, I think I still cried more for my broken Discman than for realizing the danger I had put myself through, and what I had just survived. It all came crashing down on me 2 days later, when one of my neighbors was found stabbed in the lot behind the hedge where I was attacked. I didn't know her that well. We went to Sunday school together, but my family and hers were neighbors for years. I overheard my mother talking on the phone about the serial killer that was making his rounds around the most affluent parts of the city, and how this was the latest in a series of muggings and stabbings in the area. Uneasy stay in LA Airbnb. I read a lot of these, and thank you all for sharing your stories. I thought maybe I should share one I have. This was back in June 2019. I, 19F at the time, went to visit my best friend. We'll call her Kelly, at her college, UCSC. A few of our hometown friends tagged along, and we stayed in her apartment for a day until our bigger trip down to LA. Us and her college friends rented a minivan and drove 6 hours down to West Hollywood. There were 6 total of us girls, and it was all going really well. Going to Malibu Beach, breakfast at the Belvedere Hotel, hiking to the Hollywood sign. Our first 2 nights were joyful, as well as our last, until late in the night. Before I go on, I'd like to give some description to the Airbnb. It was in a sketchy area. There was a shed we weren't supposed to go in the backyard among overgrown plants. There was high chain link fencing surrounding the property, and you had to enter a padlock code at the driveway to get the key. It was 1 story, 3 bedrooms. There was a glass window front porch, and that's where we'd hang out a lot and smoke weed. The back porch was similar, but more beaten down. We kept both doors locked at all times and the driveway gate as well. It was on Virgil Avenue. I have the exact address, but I won't release that now. Our last night, Saturday, we were hanging out on the front porch. What was so weird and a foreshadow we didn't see is that while on the porch, we heard the padlock and chain jiggling around down at the gate. There was all brush, so we couldn't see, but I remember we all retreated inside for a little bit until we worked up the courage to go back out and finish the joint. A bunch of us went to bed early, figuring we had to be up early to drive back to SC. Some of them still needed to study for finals. I remember smoking and then heading back to bed around 11:30 p.m. My other friend, we'll call her Gabby, was the last to go to bed around 1:30 a.m., except for Kelly. She stayed awake talking to her crush on FaceTime. I was sleeping for a while until I was woken up by one of the girls in a frantic state. She was pleading with me to come out to the living room, that they think there's something in the house. I was honestly pissed at first that they couldn't figure it out themselves and that they'd woken me up. I didn't know yet the desperation of the situation. I walked out into the living room and everyone was there except one other, who was sleeping. From the living room you can't see the kitchen, and that's also where the bathroom is. I sat on the couch and they all, simultaneously, were trying to tell me what was going on in whispers. Again, I was annoyed, so I said, "If you really think there's something going on, why don't you call the cops?" And all of them told me to shh, and I shut up. It was for 5 seconds that I was quiet, and I heard movement in the kitchen, almost like putting something in the sink or moving cups around. My head dropped and I jumped off the couch so fast, in a manner I will never forget. I gathered all of the girls into one bedroom, went to wake up the last. She was so annoyed at me for waking her up. I had to be a little mean to get her the fuck up. And we took safety to the other bedroom. We put a chair against the door. Me and another girl stood by it just listening and guarding. At this point, we're a mix of fear pacing, crying, not being able to breathe, and going nonverbal. I was trembling. Kelly was on the phone with the cops. Me and the other door guarder were talking about what happened. She said Kelly was still on FaceTime and started hearing things going on in the bathroom, like drawers opening and our cosmetics being moved around. This was around 3 a.m. Kelly didn't remember me going to bed and thought it was me, so she called out my name twice. This woke Gabby up, and Gabby came out asking what was going on. This caused the other girls to come out and check it out. I remember one of the girls told me she heard spoons rattling and her voice was shaking. They thought it could be an animal, so they went by the open kitchen doorway and banged a water bottle against the frame and yelled to scare it off. But obviously, that did nothing. That's when they came and woke me. At this point, the cops are taking long, of course, and all the girls are feeling different, wild emotions. There was a huge window in the bedroom, and I just remember feeling so terrified that they'd climb in through there. The other door guard looked at me and whispered, "Wait, put your ear and listen." I heard footsteps. I wanted to scream, cry, throw up. I whispered that we weren't going to share this at that particular moment. The cops come, but are not allowed to enter without us letting them in. This causes another huge problem, and Kelly is fighting with the dispatcher on the phone. I'm asking if they could just come to the window, that we don't want to go out there. Eventually, the other door guard gains the courage and goes out to let the cops in. Well, I've had many experiences with cops. I live on a bad block, and this one I will remember. There were two females. You think that they'd understand our fear, but not in the slightest. They said they searched the home and saw nothing. They didn't ask questions, they weren't curious, they just wanted to leave. They kept glancing to the weed on the table, as if inferring it was all because we were high. Mind you, some of us weren't smokers, and those of us who were, it was like 11 p.m. Weed has never affected me nor anyone I know like this before. We asked them if they searched the backyard, that there was a rundown shed back there, and they were hesitant to do that for us. "Y'all didn't search that in the first place?" They leave, and Kelly looks at us and goes, "I don't know about y'all, but there's no way I'm sleeping here tonight, and I want to leave right now." We all immediately agreed. It was probably around 4 a.m. at this point. We pack up our stuff and leave for a 6-hour drive to SC. During the drive, the sun rises. I text my parents and Kelly is messaging the Airbnb host. When the host woke up, she was never helpful, and I honestly don't know much development on that. We were in California for 2 more days. I remember Gabby and I just hung out on the beach while the girls studied and took their finals, but it all felt so weird. It was the only thing we could think about, talk about, and at one point, Kelly broke down crying because she was holding her strength for so long, trying to be the dominant one. It was so sad to watch when we all just group hugged her. It didn't feel real, and our brains were just trying to come up with an explanation, trying to piece it all together and make sense of it. On the long ride back to SC, one of the girls was saying maybe it was something supernatural. That seems like such a far reach, regardless of how big a fan of ghosts I am. The most sensible explanation is that a homeless person broke in and enjoyed going through the girls' belongings. Our noises and yells didn't scare them off because they were probably high. So often I think, what if we just went into the kitchen? But if there was someone there, what the fuck would we have done? And what if it was nothing? Just empty space? This event took up my life for a while. I was so strict on all the windows and doors being locked at night back at home, checking 3 times. I was pleading with my dad to get a new, updated alarm system. I put a bat under my bed. Honestly, all the stuff we sadly should already be doing. But that fear, that inability to fall asleep for months, I don't want that ever again. Thank you for reading. I don't know who or what was in that house, but this experience caused me to buy and always bring my portable door lock to Airbnbs with me. The circus next door, and my rebuilding year. I consider most of 1996 to be a rebuilding year in my life. I was 25 years old, fresh out of a relationship that crashed and burned right before the wedding. So deep was the crater and widespread fallout that I had to move to a different state to avoid my to-be father-in-law's friends in law enforcement, who were making sure I spent time roadside with them at least 4 times in the first 2 months after it all ended. I started over in a new place with a lack of resources and connections that were going to make it hard to get back into shape before I turned 30. Still, I was free and beholden to no one but my creditors, so I had that going for me. I lived in my means and rented a townhouse on a long row of properties in a less than reputable part of town. I didn't have time to do a walkthrough before I moved in. In fact, I rented the place unseen based on the online ad. It was close to the job, which was great because someone trashed my car the week before I moved out, and I ended up driving a beat-up Dodge pickup that I bought with the last of my savings. Once settled, I was locked into the rental for 12 months, which oddly gave me a sense of permanence in my new surroundings, and helped me get to work on my new life and career in human capital management and training services. My unit was at the end of the block of 12, with 2 bedrooms up top, a master bath, and a half bath in the living area. It was not a massive space, but it felt empty for lack of any furniture. I slept on an inflatable mattress my first 3 months, and used folding chairs and a card table to eat and watch television. The block was a place where people were neither on their way up or back down. Young kids in their first home, recently divorced with kids, the downturned from society in one way or another. There were fights, domestic and otherwise, throughout the night. Drunken parties and birthday galas took over the block on weekends, but nobody ever interacted with other families for some reason. No one knew anyone else's name or business. At least that's what the cops told me the first time they stopped by to ask if I had heard or witnessed something going on the block. My immediate neighbors were just weird. Like a space monkey on your lawn inviting you to an anal probe kind of weird. It was a circus of 3. The short, wild-haired woman looked like an off-brand troll doll with big pink hair that defied logic and a malfunctioning soundboard that only shrieked when provoked. The tall, thin man looked like an average bald human might appear in an elongated funhouse mirror. I don't know how old they were, but they resembled old, well-worn furniture, like the contents of an elderly couple's storage locker, old and ready to be discarded. The troll lady and funhouse man were not fond of talking to neighbors, or anyone. They were troubled people. Their fights would bleed through the shared walls and get louder when talking outside. They knocked my only hanging art from the wall when one threw the other against the other side. Funhouse Man liked to take his morning coffee in the sunshine, standing behind a screen of his front door in tighty-whities and an oversized flannel shirt. He was often the first person I'd encounter in the morning on my way to work, and he would stare off across the playground into the woods, as if in a trance, long before I left the townhouse and probably long after my truck took me away. The cops knew them by their real names. There had been a child living there, but he or she had been removed from the home. A frequent guest in their little David Lynch sitcom world was a guy named Chuck. So named because Troll Doll Lady would yell his name every 10 fucking minutes anytime he was in the house. Chuck was a long haul trucker who parked his sleeper rig across the street every couple of weeks. For some reason, he didn't shower inside, so Saturday mornings, he would often run the garden hose over the fenced-in area in the back to take a cold shower, which was a lovely sight the first time I didn't know what was going on. He sometimes walked out back to take a long beer piss in the runoff drain. His aversion to indoor plumbing was never explained to me, but I'm forever grateful I never walked out back to catch him popping a squat in the tree line. For about 6 months, I tolerated the noise, let the neighbors be the bad guys, and called the police when the fights went too loud for too long, or when they all got drunk and played their 80s punk records through the night and engaged in the song of their people howling at the moon. I got to a place where I was making enough money to buy real furniture, or rent a better place. I still had a lease to honor, so I bought a sofa, a real bed, and a desk set for an office. It was still a minimalistic affair, but comfortable. The townhouse felt like my home for once, and suddenly, the intrusions from the neighbors were twice as annoying. One night, Troll Lady got into a fight with a pizza delivery driver who knocked on her door by mistake, but wouldn't give her the pizza. I only know this because the pizza and its box hit my front window at different spots. This shrieking pink-haired witch assaulted the driver, which led to a light show by police that rivaled a Mannheim Steamroller Christmas show. I was left to clean the pizza off the window and call the office to replace the window. They refused until the neighbors agreed to pay, so I enjoyed a cracked window for a month before the court accepted her guilty plea over the property damage. Her arrest was around the same time residents on our block and the next one over began reporting burglaries. I was asked by the police if I had any information or experienced anything odd other than the Three Greek circus next door. I told them I did not. Fortunately, my work and social life were on the rebound. I met a girl and we hit it off, though we stayed far from my house during the early part of our relationship, so I began spending more time away from home. Though I would often come home late to the neighbors in a loud state of either bliss or rage. During the day, maintenance worked to replace the insulation and update the HVAC systems along the attic spaces along the entire block. I didn't think much about it because the work was done while I was gone in the daytime, and I assumed the property managers would be coming into my place at some point to access my attic. Probably the last one, as they started on the far end from mine. Quickly, I lost track of the project. One night, I came home and something felt a little off. The front door was locked, the windows intact, and the back door secured. However, it felt and even smelled a little off. Sometimes I could smell the tobacco and weed upstairs when it filtered up and over the attic space, but I was sure someone had been there. I cleared the house in a short, quiet march, but found no one and nothing missing. My computer, 2 TVs, everything was intact. Except, I went to grab a beer from the fridge to calm my nerves, and found the 6-pack missing. I was sure I had 2 Scratch Patch stout packs from my last visit to Stewie's microbrew, and the loaf of bread seemed to be a little shorter than the morning before, by several slices. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I might be missing some other items as well. But I wasn't sure if that was just the growing anxiety over being robbed. I wondered if maintenance had been by to inspect the window or work in the attic, and helped themselves to a snack and drinks. It would explain the musty smell in my apartment, and given the people I knew who owned and managed the property, it would not surprise me if a couple of their day laborers took a load off for a bit. The smell was most present upstairs, but in my office, which was opposite of the neighbor's wall, so it wasn't lingering dank. It was clearly gym funk. I immediately assumed laborer because it made the most sense, so I didn't report it to police that night. The next morning, however, I discovered my medications missing from my cabinet. All of them. My Lexapro, my emergency anxiety meds, and my other bottles were gone. I checked the windows and doors again. Now, in a near panic, I called off work for the first time using a burglary as my excuse. I was the 7th house in 2 townhouse blocks to be hit in the past 2 weeks, the 5th in my block, and one of the 5 without signs of forced entry. The police wouldn't tell me much about the other incidents, and didn't seem to believe that I'd locked my doors until I reminded them who I lived next to. By that point, I really didn't want to live in that place anymore. It no longer felt like home. I was sharing it with something I felt lingered in the air around me. There was a feeling of dread, A sense of violation knowing there was someone out there who was inside of your life without your permission. Once removed, it felt like living in a house without walls, and there was a serial burglar in the neighborhood where cops traditionally left to work out its own problems and carry away the remains. A week after the break-in, a few things happened to fuck up my world even further. First, Troll Lady returned home, and because she was on house arrest, a welcome party brought out all of the freaks Friday night. Second, because I was a dumbass, I had to come home and pick up a few things I needed to spend the weekend with my new girlfriend. As she was already in the truck and we were to be on the highway out of town, there was no other choice but to bring her home with me. The lot, including my spaces, was filled with what looked like gridlock in a demolition derby, so I had to park a good distance away. Third, she insisted on seeing the inside of my townhouse and take a pee before hitting the road, so I had to introduce her to the freak show next door before even setting foot inside. Fourth, on the way up the walk to the front door, we encountered Funhouse Man in the open doorway, gatekeeper to the drunk damassery inside. He was wearing his morning apparel, briefs, and a long shirt, except with a can of Red Dog instead of coffee in his hand. Fifth, Funhouse Man looked at us coming up the walk and spoke to me for the first time in 7 months. "You tapped that?" I think he said, his wet mouth spitting the words and his dead eyes scoping my girl. I shifted to put myself between them on the sidewalk as we closed in on the door and fished my keys out of my pants. Funhouse Man panicked, letting out a squeal before diving inside and slamming the door. The party went silent instantly. Sixth, my girl was unnerved by this and lost all her thrill over being with me in that place. She walked inside my home and registered her immediate disapproval. She didn't even want to pee there. I remember making some excuses, saying it's a temporary thing and my first step to better living, but it was the beginning of the end for us, like she caught me cheating with Troll Doll Lady. Seventh, I didn't realize the party had spilled out onto the front lawn and in front of my townhouse until I opened the door to see Chuck, the trucker standing under my porch lamp looking drunk, stupid, and angry. He was joined by a few strangers who looked equal parts the same condition and also like I had just fired the lot of them from the sideshow. I stopped inside the screen door trying to think of anything to say, clever or otherwise. Chuck, the trucker, started the conversation. "You go at Kenny?" "What?" "Shit for brains. I asked if you went after Kenny in his own home." Nothing like that happened, but I knew immediately that my reality was not shared by those gathered in front of my own home. "No, he said something. I got closer to hear. He squealed like a little girl and ran inside. End of story." I was okay at the end of the first 2 sentences, but my anger got the best of me by the start of the third, and it did little to calm the group which had swollen up to about a dozen people looking for blood or things to break. Chuck was not convinced by my answer and took a step forward to open my screen door. He put a hand on the knob and stopped. "You step out here, or I come in there." "Go take a shit in a tree, asshole. You're not coming in here, and I'm not bleeding over that weirdo friend of yours. You can go beat each other like you normally—" 8. The words stopped there because Chuck had punched a hole in my screen to get to my face. I fell back and accidentally tackled my now firmly ex-girlfriend. Fortunately, I didn't have much in the way of furniture to break on the way down. The only thing going for me at that moment was the miraculous arrival of police drawn by the parking fiasco and the noise. My face was broken, my newest ex had a bloody nose and a sprained shoulder, and I was out of a good $400 in deposits for a weekend that would never happen. In short order, a few important things happened. Chuck went to jail and the charges against him would become the least of his problems. The party turned into a story time where partygoers spun their best yarn about how I insulted, assaulted, beat, or ass-raped Kenny the Funhouse Man. I was questioned about the encounter by police and spent time with an EMT who I totally failed to impress enough to get her number. I was let go as several of the partygoers were arrested for either public drunkenness, disorderly conduct, or outstanding warrants. I'm sure this warmed me to the neighbors and their friends. My weekend companion was rescued from it all by a friend who drove her out of my life forever. You would think 8 things in short order would be enough. I had to continue living next to these fuckers for at least 4 more months, and I was going to spend those months terrified by what they might do to my property while I was working or the burglars coming back. However, ninth, I woke the next morning to the neighbors cleaning up from the party. Glass, aluminum, plastic, and cardboard packed 2 full-sized bins. Credit where it's due. The fuckers recycled. From my what the fuck position in my bedroom window, I noticed 2 of the bottles stood out from the Keystone, Red Dog, and Milwaukee labels. They were the scratch brand labels from my 6-pack. Now, there was a chance that they were brought to the party by a guest with better taste in beer than friends, but that was too much of a coincidence. My brain presented a question I could not answer. Where is the attic access in this townhouse? I just assumed there was one somewhere, but never actually looked or came across it. So how did maintenance get into it? While totally unrelated to the beer bottle on a conscious level, my paranoia and cynical nature collaborated on a series of connections. As I looked around the house for a drop that I'd missed for months, my brain worked in its weird way to line up facts in such a way that would sound insane if I wrote it all out. I went upstairs. My office was where the funk smell had been most pungent. I looked around again and decided to check the closet. I didn't check it before because there was nothing in it. On the carpet, I noticed a light dusting of drywall and paint flecks. I assumed it was rubbing from the sliding door against the wall, but it concentrated on the side by the wall and not equally along the track. The closet only had hanging shelves on the interior side. Looking up, I expected to see an attic access port, but found a jagged square carved into the drywall ceiling. Maintenance was not exactly flip-this shack quality, but I didn't think even they would use a box cutter to carve a hole in the ceiling, and none of them were skinny enough to fit through that. Funhouse Man was skinny enough to potentially weasel up and down. The scuff marks on the inside wall of the closet was pretty telling. It took a while for the police to make their way over in response to my non-emergency call, but it quickly gathered their interest when the first responding officer reported what everyone missed the first time they did a half-assed search of my home. 3 unmarked cars arrived after the initial squad car. My neighbors were uncharacteristically quiet once the first cruiser rolled up around noon. I offered a folding ladder, and the police looked up into the blistering hot attic. A hole had been cut through the insulation, and a spot in the corner wide enough for a small or slender person to fit through. I was questioned again downstairs for about an hour before I heard more voices upstairs than I remember going up there. Before I could ask, a familiar face appeared at my door. My landlord. Ahmed looked concerned and astonished, which was a new expression, and the third after his, "Can I take your money?" and his general resting, "fuck off" face. "What has happened?" he asked. "What's going on? Are you alright?" He walked into my home without invitation and up to me on my sofa. I asked him if he was there to fix my cracked window. Everything else happened without my direct involvement. I remained a guest in my own home for most of the days as police took photos and marched up and down my stairs. I learned that my assumption about the attic work was wrong. The workers had to access specific units to get around the firewalls between them. In fact, there were holes in the firewall that allowed workers to enter the roof in one unit and run the entire length of the building. It was a measure that saved time and footsteps, but was a violation of several laws and codes, meaning that Ahmed's life was about to become much more complicated and expensive. These gaps in the firewalls also allowed someone to drill a hole in their own ceiling and run the length of 11 other homes, walking on the same boards laid by the property owners that muffled their presence. Every single unit in that block had a hole similar to the one in my ceiling. Further, at one time, the building had been wired for cable through the roof, and holes that had been cut to fish cable into upstairs bedrooms had been plugged up years earlier during an upgrade. Some of the patches had been replaced with removable plugs, giving someone a clear view into various bedrooms. In the attic, police found a step stool with a rope tied to the top step. It was stashed in the corner of the roof over my next-door neighbor's unit. But that's not the weirdest thing. Though all evidence pointed to the main access point being the smaller bedroom in my neighbor's unit, police did not arrest Funhouse Man or Troll Doll Lady for the crime. Around 3 in the afternoon, police had recovered items stolen from their units along with various controlled substances. Troll Doll Lady was arrested for violating the terms of her bond. Funhouse Man was taken in for the drugs. I was shocked to see a third person, not Chuck, walked out of the townhouse in cuffs. I'd never met him before. He was rail thin, thinner than Funhouse Man by half. An old man's face in a young man's body with scars and bruises all over skin I've only ever seen on corpses, white and waxy. He was naked except for soiled basketball shorts. He literally recoiled as if allergic to outside air and sun, and had to be dragged shoeless to the cruiser. I don't know who that kid was, but I got the feeling he never left the townhouse. Ever. Maybe not even the attic. The thought that this skeletal creep was looking in on me and had access to my life makes me overly cautious these days. I have eyes everywhere in my home, and I take pains to inspect the smallest spaces in and around my property. I often wake in the night seeing that face peering at me through a window or from the dark. It's been a long time, and everyone I mentioned in this story by name is dead. I don't know about the kid though. I never got a name, and I was unable to find him in any police report. Maybe he doesn't really exist. Maybe he didn't show up on any records and is languishing in prison as John Doe. Or maybe he's out there lurking in some upper level of an apartment building, or hiding inside the basement or walls. I've rarely ever felt truly home since.